The story begins with Prince Theron, 17th in line for the Solvane Kingdom's throne, standing before the royal palace, as his family and the high priest mocked him mercilessly. Born with pathetic magic reserves and a mysterious mark called the Cave King Crest, Theron was viewed as an absolute embarrassment alongside his brothers, who inherited legendary marks like Sword God. Marking his coming of age, the king cast him out to Caldrift. It was a barren, vegetation-free rock stranded in the ocean, completely cut off from shipping routes. After 10 grueling days at sea, Theron was dumped on the jagged reef with a single skiff of supplies. His relatives didn't even stick around to see him land, fully expecting him to perish. Refusing to give up, Theron navigated the rough surf and spotted a small cave opening on the rock. Stepping inside, he was met with the grim sight of skeletal remains from past castaways. As he tried clearing a spot to give the bones a proper burial, Theron grabbed an old ice axe. Suddenly, a flat, monotone voice resonated inside his head. The Crest's built-in guidance system. It announced that his mark granted high-tier mining abilities, utility buffs, and boosted stats while underground. Following the Crest's prompt, glowing white markers appeared across the rock face, highlighting prime strike points. One clean swing shattered the stone instantly. The Crest also unlocked night vision and a spatial storage perk, allowing him to pocket tons of rock and raw ore without carrying any physical weight. Digging further into the rock, his mining proficiency steadily increased, and valuable deposits like iron, gold, and precious gems began surfacing. Theron then unearthed 2 rare artifacts: turtle stones that add a day to one's life, and mana-boosting crystals. Having endured endless ridicule over his weak magic, Theron consumed 90 crystals all at once. Testing a simple gust spell just to blow away the leftover dust, a massive gale erupted, tearing through the cavern with terrifying force. Realizing his growth potential was now virtually infinite, he threw himself into deep excavation. Reaching 30 meters down, he ran straight into a bright blue slime. A Crest prompt immediately informed him that monster taming was now active. For the first time in memory, the cast-off prince felt a genuine surge of hope and excitement. What everyone called a useless mark was turning his lonely banishment into a path to unstoppable power. Most people ignored taming since wild creatures were aggressive, but on this empty rock, Theron welcomed any company. He named his new companion Squill, and though it couldn't speak, its quiet presence brought genuine warmth as Theron returned to digging. After 3 days of non-stop tunneling, his spatial vault was practically bursting with high-grade ore. Channeling hundreds of magic crystals, his mana pool expanded until intermediate spells became effortless. He solved his survival needs easily, pulling fish out of the sea with lightning and summoning rain for fresh water. Squill turned out to be surprisingly sharp, mimicking Theron's actions, kneading his muscles, and offering a cushiony bed. Theron ended up taming 10 additional slimes, though distinguishing one from another proved tricky. Hold on a second. Be sure to hit like and subscribe for more hidden manga recommendations. Now I challenge you to drop a comment saying, "I'm loving it." I bet most of you won't actually do it. Alright, back to the story. Early one morning, Squill nudged Theron awake and gestured toward the shore, where a battered wreck had washed up. 3 green-skinned travelers lay bleeding against the sharp rocks. They were goblins, clad in threadbare furs, hovering right on the brink of death. Humans and goblins usually mistrusted each other, but Theron refused to turn his back on them. Casting a quick healing spell to stabilize their injuries, he helped Squill carry them inside the shelter. While waiting for the trio to wake, Theron ventured back down into the mines and found 2 rare items: a Pyroxene stone with eternal light and a purifying stone capable of shattering any curse. Returning to the cavern entrance, he caught the goblins mid-argument. The group comprised a towering, heavily built general named Varkan, a small princess named Alira, and an ancient shaman named Ovrim. The initial greeting went poorly. General Varkan drew a blade on Theron, wary of humans and spooked by Theron's intense gaze, a side effect of his non-stop mining. Setting them at ease, Theron offered food and showcased a light spell, though his overwhelming magic power only made the general more jumpy. The standoff ended abruptly when Princess Alira collapsed. The old shaman revealed that a congenital curse was steadily draining her life force. Theron stepped forward and applied the purifying stone to destroy the curse, followed by 79 turtle stones to extend her remaining lifespan. Alira opened her eyes immediately, feeling vibrant energy for the first time in years. Overcome with gratitude and shame, General Varkan bowed low, offering sincere apologies for his hostility. Sharing a meal together, Theron introduced himself as an exiled royal. The goblins recounted their dark past, Orcs had razed their homeland, leaving Alira as their last surviving noble. After a full year spent fleeing monsters and hostile human bands across the mainland, their surviving clan of 800 took to the ocean in search of refuge. Their battered vessel was just one of many ships that had scattered across the waves, hoping to find a quiet place to rebuild their lives. The castaway goblins noted their ship was falling apart anyway, and Princess Alira thanked Theron deeply for saving her. Even with the curse broken, her base life expectation was only 79 days. Theron quickly reassured her that she had nothing to fear, promising to mine enough turtle stones in the cavern to extend her life indefinitely. Moved to tears, General Varkan and Shaman Overim begged to join the mining operation. Theron agreed, but explained that to share his Crest's passive boosts, like heightened efficiency and speed, he would first need to tame them as companions. Despite their status as warriors and royalty, the goblins accepted without hesitation. Theron officially registered General Varkan, Shaman Overim, and Princess Alira. Following a brief meal, they prepared for work. Since goblins lacked dark vision, Theron crafted everlasting torches by binding radiant pyroxene stones to wooden shafts. Deep in the cavern, he showcased his power. With one strike, a huge wall of stone crumbled and vanished directly into his inventory, leaving the goblins speechless. To streamline operations, Theron assigned his slimes to collect whatever rock the goblins broke and pass it over for instant storage. Operating under this routine, the team mined continuously for 3 straight days. The barren reef was rapidly transforming into a cozy underground settlement. Theron carved a stone kitchen for Alira, constructed private washrooms, and created a water basin fed by magic. Alira proved to be an exceptional cook, turning basic royal rations into delicious dishes like baked apple pie. However, a new challenge soon hit. Their flour, butter, and sugar reserves were running out. While fish were plentiful, they lacked firewood for cooking and rich soil for growing crops. With no trade ships passing through, their daily diet was becoming dangerously sparse. Determined to solve the problem, Theron headed back into the lower shafts alone while the team rested. Riding atop Squill, he broke through into a massive, hidden subterranean chamber. Unlike the cold rock above, the walls here glowed like a warm sunset, and rich black soil carpeted the floor. Suddenly, a massive black spider emerged. Though Theron froze in fear, the creature didn't attack. It was retreating to shield its hatchlings. Sensing no hostility, Theron offered to tame the creature rather than engage in a fight. The mother spider, named Sithra, along with her 13 spiderlings, joined his growing roster. As soon as the contract formed, the Crest's voice chimed inside his mind. Having accumulated enough skill experience, his Cave King Crest leveled up to rank 2. This unlocked a specialized workshop interface, allowing him to refine and fuse raw items right inside his inventory. While smelting iron remained locked due to his workshop tier, the ability to synthesize finished goods opened massive possibilities for his expanding subterranean domain. Reaching rank 2 expanded his inventory functionality with advanced manufacturing features. He found he could process raw rock directly into refined construction materials like marble slabs, sand, and fine gravel. He could even alter their dimensions simply by concentrating on the design, meaning he could produce pristine columns or statues without lifting a hammer. Furthermore, a newly unlocked sculpting skill smoothed out the jagged cavern surfaces during excavation, making it simple to shape level walkways and stairs. Theron then headed back up to the surface, followed by Sithra and her 13 offspring. Utilizing his new sculpting ability, he widened the steep tunnel and carved clean steps, allowing the massive spiders to navigate easily. Upon reaching the surface, the goblins panicked at the sight of the giant arachnids, but Theron quickly reassured them, explaining that the spiders were now friendly allies under his command. The shaman Overim recognized them as cave spiders, though their massive size shocked him, as they were usually far smaller on the mainland. He warned Theron they were vicious and venomous, but their presence was actually a massive blessing. The soil inside their nest, composed mostly of spider droppings, turned out to be insanely fertile. Overim explained that this nutrient-rich dirt could grow crops without sunlight and held moisture perfectly, making it the ultimate fertilizer for their barren, rocky island. Alira welcomed Sithra with a piece of grilled fish, which the giant spider happily gobbled up. Realizing they finally had a way to cultivate food, Theron threw a small feast to welcome their new arachnid allies. Over the next few days, everyone pitched in to set up camp. Drawing on ancient tribal knowledge, Overim and Varkan constructed a makeshift blast furnace. Though their blacksmithing methods were crude, they successfully forged a sturdy new iron ice axe for Theron. Meanwhile, Sithra and her offspring hauled the fertile spider soil up to the surface to establish a modest farm. Alira also noticed that the spider silk was remarkably tough, yet soft as silk. She used it to weave durable fishing nets and a smooth hand towel for Theron, even offering to make him a soft bed so he could stop sleeping on slime. The following day, Theron tested an unusual material found in the spider den called sunstone, an orange rock that accelerates growth in living things. He buried an apple seed in the spider soil and applied a tiny fragment of sunstone. Within seconds, the seed shot up, matured into a full-grown tree, and bore ripe red apples. The goblins stood frozen in disbelief at the sight of fresh fruit on their desolate rock. Theron realized that even with a limited stash of 678 sunstones, these gems were their ticket to survive. He placed Alira in charge of the farm and sunstone supply, appointing Ovram as her chief advisor. With their royal rations running low, growing fresh fruit and vegetables meant they wouldn't have to rely entirely on fish, especially with silk, soil, and instant crops available, turning this desolate rock into a thriving home. Theron kept digging deeper, eventually unearthing a rare dragon ball stone capable of reviving the dead. Knowing how catastrophic it would be to lose such an item if he fell in battle, he stashed the resurrection stone near the cave entrance for emergencies. Just then, Varkan sprinted over in a panic. A second ship from their tribe had just anchored nearby. Princess Alira overflowed with joy at the sight of more survivors, including Varkan's own child, waving their tribal banner from the deck. Assuming the tribe would want to sail away now that they had a working ship, Theron offered the goblins a chest of priceless gems as a parting gift to reboot their lives, but they adamantly refused to go. They swore that their loyalty belonged entirely to Theron and insisted on remaining at his side. Hearing this touched Theron deeply. After being cast out and hated by his own royal family, he had finally found a place to call home. But the heartfelt moment vanished when a sudden rogue wave flipped the goblin vessel upside down. With over 200 non-swimmers flailing in the water, Theron knew his tiny boat couldn't save them all. Cranking his mana to dangerous levels, he consumed over 8,000 magic crystals at once and cast a massive free spell, transforming the choppy ocean into a solid ice highway straight to the wreck. Utilizing spiderwebbing and slimes as makeshift lifesavers, they successfully pulled all 203 goblins to safety. While healing the survivors with high-tier magic, Theron spotted a strange, rotund, bearded man standing completely naked among the crowd. No one had any idea who he was. He wasn't a goblin, nor had he been aboard the ship. The mysterious stranger simply ambled into the kitchen, snatched some fish, and sat back watching the laborers with a smug grin. When an annoyed goblin worker tried forcing him to help forge tools, the old man casually took control of the furnace. Working with unbelievable speed, the newcomer hammered out an ice axe head that looked like a delicate masterpiece. Even though the goblin scoffed that it appeared far too thin to be practical, Theron tested the tool himself and found it performed twice as well as anything he had ever swung. The stranger was a master smith. Theron handed him a spider silk loincloth and dubbed him Grimble, whose high-grade tools caused island productivity to soar. To keep up with the mountain of ore coming out of the mines, Theron tamed even more slimes to haul the weight. Everything was going smoothly, with Alira's farm flourishing and the territory expanding, until Theron noticed that rare turtle stones were growing increasingly scarce. Still, with a growing population and a master blacksmith on board, the exiled prince had successfully built a functional kingdom out of a barren rock. Spotting the dwindling supply of turtle stones, Theron also checked his system, where his cave king Crest warned that deeper mining in the current shafts risked a collapse. When he brought this up with Alira, her sad, brave smile reminded him that he needed to find a permanent fix for her short lifespan. Exploring an uncharted tunnel, Theron stumbled upon a hidden chamber built entirely of white marble. Inside lay false heartstones, which unlocked a new Crest ability, crafting and customizing automated dolls as battle companions. Venturing further, he found a glowing golden demon evolution stone, which his Crest identified as a tool to evolve monsters into higher species, resetting their age and body while preserving all their memories. Theron rushed back to the surface to review the discovery with his core team. While Ovram and Varkan were content as they were, Alira confessed her desire to grow stronger and learn magic, something goblins normally could never wield. Theron handed her the stone, and she was instantly engulfed in radiant light. As the illumination faded, Alira stood transformed into a stunning woman with long black hair and pale skin, looking entirely human. The sight was so breathtaking that Grimble suffered an intense nosebleed and passed out on the spot. Despite her human appearance, Theron could still feel their taming link, confirming she was technically still a monster companion. Alira broke into tears of joy, realizing she was no longer the outcast sister mocked and shunned for her ugly goblin appearance. She pledged her everlasting loyalty to Theron, who simply asked that she keep cooking him delicious meals. By the following morning, Alira was already practicing beginner spells and martial arts techniques. However, a new crisis emerged. Their finite supply of sunstones was running low. Overham proposed a massive land reclamation project to construct a natural farm that wouldn't require magic stones. Theron also wanted to carve out an open courtyard where the goblin children could play safely. Though Overham offered to dig it out manually, Theron decided to unleash his Cave King powers to speed up construction. Heading down to the shoreline, he activated his workshop skill to convert raw boulder into heavy stone blocks and sand, dropping them into the waves. To the bewildered goblins, it looked as if an entire mountain was rising directly out of the sea. Theron methodically laid down the perimeter for the expansion, transforming the tiny coral reef into a legitimate island domain. Finishing the outline, Theron used magic to blast away trapped seawater and stacked boulders to form a massive 10,000 square meter platform. To make it enjoyable for the goblin youth, he used his workshop skill to pave a smooth stone plaza. Watching the children race around freely, a wave of satisfaction washed over Theron. He was finally becoming a leader his people truly looked up to. But the tranquil scene shattered when a massive black avian monster, known as a killer bird, plummeted from the sky and snagged Grimble by his rear. Dozens more giant birds filled the air, infamous for swooping down to carry off livestock and children. Theron ordered an immediate retreat to the caves, but the playing children were trapped too far out. General Varkin charged into the open with dual axes to draw their aggression, while Theron unleashed fire spells to clear the skies. To block the cave mouth from invaders, Theron combined his false heartstones with tons of rock to construct a 3-meter-tall stone golem. The massive guardian stood post, blocking any birds from forcing their way inside. Meanwhile, the bird carrying Grimble gagged from his sticky bare skin and retched, dropping him back down, where Squill the slime bounced into position to cushion his plummets. With everyone safe, Theron cast a devastating blizzard spell that froze the remaining flock mid-air, leaving behind a massive pile of fresh meat. Alira mentioned that killer bird meat tasted like a rich combination of chicken, beef, and pork. That evening, the entire settlement celebrated with a massive island barbecue. To preserve the leftover game, Theron used frost magic to hollow out a walk-in freezer inside the cavern. During the feast, Theron gifted Alira 800 magic crystals to amplify her mana reserves, wanting her capable of defending the territory whenever he had to leave. Fired up by the battle, Varkin's son Torvin begged Theron to help him grow stronger. Theron agreed to bring Audric into the deep shafts to search for another evolution stone, where the boy marveled at Theron's mining power, though. Theron modestly admitted he had been deemed utterly useless back in his home kingdom. Their excavation eventually broke through into a colossal subterranean hall that dwarfed all previous chambers. Inside sat rows of towering humanoid stone figures lined up in silence. Suddenly, the statues jolted to life. They were ancient golems, and unlike Theron's crude doll creation, these ancient automatons wielded magic, heavy armor, and massive broadswords. A golem spewed a stream of fire, but Theron's magic shield held firm. As the armored behemoths closed in with drawn swords, Theron readied his counterattack. He unleashed a torrential storm spell, hurling the ancient guardians backward. The heavy golems shattered against the stone walls, completely overwhelmed by Theron's magic. Realizing how dangerous the lower tunnels were, Theron ordered the slimes to halt all mining to protect the workers. While sifting through the debris, Torvin uncovered a golden stone. It turned out to be a magic stone rather than the evolution stone he sought. Theron realized these golems were artificial constructs powered by these cores. Suddenly, a terrified shriek announced the arrival of Grimble, the naked blacksmith, who had blundered into the deep chamber without carrying a light. Grimble became instantly obsessed with the giant silver swords and armor, which were forged from mithril, a legendary metal far stronger and lighter than steel. Even with its lightweight reputation, the 3-meter blade proved too heavy for Theron or the goblins to lift. Theron swung his pickaxe to break the gear down, storing 900 kilograms of raw mithril ingots in his inventory. Back on the surface, the goblins held a contest to see who could lift the giant sword they brought back, but even Sithra the spider failed. Determined to impress his son Torvin, General Varkin activated his warrior crest and managed to hoist the blade, but his grip slipped. The heavy hilt struck his head, knocking him cold before Theron quickly healed him. The sudden scare served as a wake-up call for Varkin to take better care of himself for his son's sake. Grimble tossed the mithril sword into his furnace, rapidly forging a pure mithril ice axe for Theron. The tool felt light as a twig, yet proved far sharper than anything Theron had ever wielded. With Grimble's legendary skill confirmed, Theron decided to craft a new security force using the remaining mithril and golem heartstones. Alira, who had been training hard in martial arts and ice magic, brought Theron a cool drink. When she casually crushed a coconut with her bare hands, the display inspired Theron to redesign his guardians. Rather than massive, clunky sentries, he used his workshop skill to assemble 14 human-sized golems. 10 were fitted with magic stones to patrol the caves, detect magic, and project defensive shields. For the final guardian, Theron experimented by building the frame out of pure mithril instead of stone. The result was a slender silver humanoid, radiating a soft, mystical glow. The masterpiece looked so noble that Grimble fell to his knees in awe. Seeing what the new guards could do, Grimble set to work hammering out custom mithril gear to fortify the colony. Theron decided to pause mining operations, noting how tirelessly Torvin was searching for evolution stones. Walking back toward the cave entrance alongside Squill the Slime, he felt satisfied with the colony's progress. Grimble had even forged a fine mithril bell for the guard golems to sound in times of danger. Near the entrance, Theron spotted Ovrum, the elderly goblin shaman alongside. Grimble, who was smearing purple mucus from a dire clam, a rare dye for royal garments, though Grimble, being himself, licked it and passed out instantly from the venom. As they chatted, Ovrum revealed that he possessed the Magic King Crest, a legendary mark capable of boosting magic power and unlocking high-tier spells. Yet Ovrum felt the crest was useless to him, since goblins lack the mana reserves to activate it. Having suffered similar ridicule over his own Cave King Crest, Theron felt an instant connection and promised to help Ovrum harness his power. Their quiet conversation ended abruptly as General Varkin came sprinting toward them in panic. Down on the beach, the tide had washed up the corpse of a massive orc. The goblins, whose original village was burned down by orcs, grew furious and demanded to mutilate the body in revenge. Alira stepped forward with quiet authority to stop them, reminding the crowd not to stoop to the level of their oppressors. Theron agreed with her, and Ovrum stepped in to arrange a proper burial for the dead orc. The mystery deepened as more washed-up bodies appeared along the coastline, including wolf-like kobolds scattered among shattered ship timbers. A brutal naval battle had clearly taken place just off the coast. While searching through the floating wreckage for supplies and survivors, Theron and Alira caught the sound of faint whimpering coming from a golden jewelry box. A magical lock held the container shut, but Theron channeled his power to snap the latch open. Inside huddled a tiny, fluffy white pup, a baby kobold. Though terrified at first, the little pup quickly warmed up to Theron and Alira. Knowing goblins and kobolds were bitter enemies, Alira took charge of the baby, promising to convince the village that the pup posed no threat. By the next morning, the baby kobold had captured everyone's attention. Squill crafted a soft bed of slime, while Grimble made a pair of wooden maracas to keep the pup entertained. Varkin tried pulling funny faces to make the baby laugh, but his battle-scarred mug only terrified the child, leaving the general pouting. Even as the colony rallied around its smallest addition, Theron stayed on guard, aware that the battle at sea meant outsiders were drawing closer to their hidden sanctuary. After shrinking away from Varkin and Sithra, the baby kobold snuggled safely into Alira's arms. Leaving surface patrol to Alira and the golems, Theron headed back down to resume mining. Deep underground, his mithril pickaxe struck a strange cluster of world tree seeds. Since his magical guide couldn't identify non-minerals, Theron made a mental note to ask Ovrum later. Nella soon arrived at the mining shaft holding the pup, who immediately leaped into Theron's arms. The baby had clearly imprinted on Theron as a father figure from the moment it opened its eyes. Mid-conversation, a mithril golem rushed down the tunnel and struck its alarm bell. Theron sprinted to the beach and spotted a battered warship anchored offshore. A landing party of 10 muscular kobolds, led by gray-furred Rogon and brown-furred Brannock, were rowing toward the sand in small boats. Brannock's keen nose had tracked the scent of their young master straight to the island. Their expressions turned to horror when they saw goblins waiting on the shore, recognizing them as the Vern tribe, their ancient blood enemies. Assuming their young prince was already dead, the kobolds prepared to fight to the last breath. Varkin recognized the brothers as the very commanders who had slain his sons years ago. Despite Alira and Ovrum shouting for peace, both sides clashed in a frenzy. Though Rogan and Brannock fought with terrifying speed, Varkin's raw power combined with Sithra's web traps proved overwhelming. Alira cast a wave of lightning magic to paralyze the remaining invaders, ending the skirmish without a single casualty. Returning from the mines, Theron found the kobold party bound securely in nets. Rogan, bracing for execution, asked Varkin to take his head quickly. When Theron stepped into view, every goblin knelt in deep respect, stunning the captive kobolds. Theron unbuttoned his shirt to reveal the baby kobold resting against his chest, bringing Rogan to tears. The warriors realized the sole heir to their royal line was alive and well. Rogan explained that an enemy orc fleet had wiped out their kingdom. In her final moments, the queen used her remaining mana to seal her child inside the enchanted jewelry box, praying it would float to someone capable of protecting him. Since Theron had dispelled a barrier that required high-level magic to break, Rogan fell to his knees and begged Theron to adopt and raise the prince. He offered their remaining lives and their warship as payment for the child's safety. Theron hesitated, wary of the generational hatred between goblins and kobolds. But Alira and Ovrum spoke up, declaring that old feuds had no place on the island, and pledging to honor Theron's choice. Even Varkin buried his grudge, admitting that the island answered only to Theron. Theron officially welcomed the kobolds into the community, declaring that the cruel laws of the old world stopped at their shores. He intended for the island to serve as a haven for anyone seeking refuge. With tears streaming down their faces, the kobolds bowed in gratitude, though dire news remained. Dozens of wounded and starving kobolds were still trapped aboard the broken ship offshore. Theron immediately set out for the vessel to treat the survivors and bring them ashore. Theron boarded the damaged vessel to inspect the situation, finding conditions far grimmer than anticipated. Cramped and filthy quarters had left dozens of kobolds maimed or unable to walk. Among the fallen lay the kobold queen, whose body he permitted to be buried in the island's new cemetery. Lacking high-rank area healing spells, Theron worked alongside Alira to tend to each survivor individually. Seeing the crisis, the entire settlement stepped up, with Ovrum's goblins hauling the wounded, while Sithra used silk lines and Squill served as a stretcher. Grimble set to work immediately, carving crude crutches and walking canes for the amputees. Even Varkin set his ancient resentment aside, ordering his warriors to carry food, fresh water, and unload remaining cargo. With everyone safe on land, Theron officially tamed all 100-plus kobolds to secure the island. The taming system bound the familiars from striking their master or one another, neutralizing age-old blood feuds. For hours, Theron renamed every single kobold to seal their status as recognized citizens. Leadership of the tribe went to two prominent brothers, Rogan and Brannock. Over a shared meal, Theron confided his heavy burden to Overim, who offered steadying wisdom. The old shaman reminded him that although goblins and kobolds shared a history of violence, both knew the pain of losing homes to orcs and enduring human hatred. Ovrum pledged to forge unity between the two clans by placing them together in the mining operations. Next, Theron unveiled the world tree seed he had recovered during his travels. Ovrum recalled ancient folklore describing a majestic tree capable of bestowing legendary blessings, yet whose downfall brought ruin to ancient realms. Driven by curiosity, Theron resolved to plant it. Approaching Alira for assistance, his awkward phrasing briefly made her think he was proposing to start a family. Blushing hard, she quickly recovered and offered a sunstone to aid in the tree's growth. Later, Rogan detailed his tribe's tragic flight after the Nasher orc clan razed their homeland, explaining how Skarn orc sea raiders had hounded their ships across open waters. Following ancient lore regarding a forgotten southern continent, both refugee groups eventually landed on Theron's shores. To accommodate this sudden population surge, Theron spent the afternoon channeling his Cave King power to enlarge the territory. Raising a massive plateau 10 meters above sea level, he established a protected living zone. At the epicenter of this newly forged ground, he prepared the soil for the World Tree seed. Just as he knelt to bury the seed, the eccentric Grimble materialized without a sound, watching intently in his usual unbothered state as the island's next expansion began. Theron buried the seed in the central plaza and readied a sunstone to catalyze its growth. Before he could even channel the gem's energy, a vibrant green shoot broke through the dirt on its own. The moment Alira applied the sunstone's aura, the plant exploded into motion. Rapidly expanding bark forced Theron and Alira into a desperate retreat, while Grimble, caught unawares, tripped and became embedded in the surging trunk, riding it upward into the sky past the height of Capitol spires. Though left dangling among cloud-scraping branches, the old man seemed thoroughly thrilled by the ride. Gazing upward, Theron and Alira watched a shimmering golden dust drift down from the towering canopy, carrying a sweet aroma. The glowing haze exerted an irresistible magical influence. Inhaling the floating particles plunged everyone into an uninhibited state of bliss. Normally reserved, Alira burst into laughter and openly confessed her love to Theron. Swept up in the euphoria, Theron took her hands and spun around, joined by delighted kobold hatchlings. Sensing the commotion, cavern monsters poured out from the subterranean tunnels to investigate. Varkan and Rogan initially drew weapons in alarm, but as soon as the golden cloud enveloped them, the dust instantly shattered their restraint, leaving them lost in pleasure. Former rivals embraced, laughed, and began dancing in a massive circle together. Arriving at the clearing, Overim and Torvin held back, recognizing the floating dust as a potent hallucinogen. Keeping his face covered, Overim dispatched the breathing-exempt mithril golem to retrieve Grimble and seal the ruptured trunk seam where the euphoric powder was spewing out. Once Spider Soak patched the leak and the golden mist dispersed, sanity returned to the settlement. Lingering awkwardness settled over the crowd, especially for Varkan, who found himself holding hands with his ancient rivals. Remembering her sudden confession, Alira turned red and avoided Theron's eyes. With order restored, the colony turned its focus to studying the miraculous tree. Its timber proved feather-light, yet tougher than forged iron, while its foliage possessed remarkable curative properties. Grimble harvested fallen branches to fashion custom handles for all their mithril tools. Put to work underground, Torvin and Theron noticed their fatigue vanishing instantly, proving the world tree bestowed a passive, continuous stamina restoration effect across the area. Amid the heavy labor, a sudden tearing sound alerted Theron that his pants had split wide open. He shuffled awkwardly back to the surface to ask Alira for a quick repair. Alira mentioned that the kobolds were master tanners, currently crafting gear from monster hides and spider silk. Offering to tailor him new clothes, she asked to inspect the torn seam. In his haste to demonstrate the tear, Theron dropped his trousers completely, only to discover his undergarments had shredded as well, leaving him totally exposed. Alira shrieked in embarrassment, while Squill the slime swiftly leaped up to shield his midsection. Fighting back her fluster, Alira promised to craft him a full set of reinforced leather garments and underclothing. Though his dignity as leader took a heavy blow, the colony gained access to superior armor. Theron's mortification deepened when Grimble strolled out, proudly showing off a pair of tight, glossy leather trunks the kobolds had tailored for him. Scrambling for a nearby throw cloth, Theron wrapped his waist and bolted into the mines to lose himself in work. Swinging his pickaxe alongside the workers, Theron breached a rock face, releasing a surging torrent of scalding hot water. Torvin cheered at the sight, revealing that his clan bathed in natural thermal springs daily, solving the mystery of the goblins' pristine hygiene, though Theron feared potential flooding or toxic runoff. Before anyone could test the pool, Grimble dived in head first and gulped down a mouthful to prove its safety. Seeking a reliable opinion, Theron called over Brannock, the keen-nosed kobold tracker. Sniffing the vapor, Brannock declared the water pure, adding that it smelled vastly better than Grimble. Wanting to pump the thermal water topside, Theron lacked a method to transport it without draining his mana. He consulted Grimble, who demanded massive piles of raw iron ore and stone, which Theron summoned using his domain abilities. Grimble labored like a master engineer, casting heavy iron pipes and complex mechanical valves. The massive iron conduits proved too heavy for standard workers to maneuver, prompting Theron to command his stone golems to handle the heavy assembly. Days later, Theron stepped into the main tunnel to find polished iron conduit running along the cavern walls. On the surface, the entire population gathered around a massive T-shaped junction pipe where, with theatrical flair, Grimble cranked a heavy valve and pulled a lever, releasing a surging stream of hot water. Adjusting the output nozzle, he sent a warm fountain airborne that showered the cheering crowd, sparking an instant celebration. Infused with luminous minerals, the mist imparted rapid healing and energy restoration, akin to the world tree's aura. Goblins and kobolds splashed through the puddles together, setting aside generations of conflict. Even stern General Varkan gave into the mood, laughing while playing in the water with kobold children. Watching the joy around him, Theron realized this spontaneous bath unified his people far better than any speech could. Joining the fray, he used localized water spells to playfully drench Grimble. As the festivities wrapped up and everyone began wringing out their clothes, Alira walked over to Theron. Her drenched outfit clung tightly to her frame, causing Theron to freeze up with a burning blush. Desperate to hide his reaction, he immediately cast a gust of wind magic to dry everyone's garments at once. Heading back to camp, Theron took pride in the growing harmony within his colony, even if he suspected Grimble's engineering stunt was just an excuse to strip everyone down. Meanwhile, far offshore, an orc pirate warband was gripped by absolute panic. Sailors frantically dumped chests of gold, weapons, and heavy cargo, desperately jettisoning weight to outrun a terrifying predator. Their veteran captain, a hardened warrior of 30 years, trembled in terror on the deck, swearing he had never encountered a beast as monstrous as the beast prowling the waters around Theron's island. Back ashore, Theron assigned Overham to oversee construction of a permanent outdoor bathhouse near the World Tree. While the surface team broke ground, Theron descended back into the lower shafts, eager to unearth additional minerals to bolster their growing settlement. Deep in the darkness, he swung his pickaxe alongside his miners, determined to contribute to their expansion. Nearby, Torvin labored harder than anyone, driven by a desire to find a demon-shattering stone and unlock his dormant magic. Theron noticed Führer's exhaustion and tried to pull him away, but the young goblin refused to quit. Moments later, a sudden blast echoed through the tunnel where Torvin was digging. Quick thinking from Theron and a shield from his golem saved the boy from a hidden trap. Hidden inside the rubble, they uncovered a small wooden chest. Theron used his magic to disarm the lock, revealing 3 golden demon-slaying stones alongside a clear, mysterious crystal. Ajak was overcome with emotion, watching his relentless digging finally pay off. Examining the gem, Theron learned from his advisor that it was a substitute stone. This legendary relic could copy any magical stone, even a dragon orb capable of reviving the dead. Despite its priceless value, Torvin insisted Theron keep it for the colony, proving how much he had matured. Their excitement vanished when a mithril golem burst in, ringing its bell in a frantic warning. Rushing to the shore, Theron spotted a massive Royal Navy warship anchored off the coast, severely battered. Black stains covered its white sails, and a skull flag fluttered overhead, marking it as a prize of Skarn's orc pirates. Strangely, there was no sign of the rest of the pirate fleet. The lone warship looked like it had barely survived a nightmarish battle. A small skiff rowed toward the beach, carrying an orc captain named Lucian. Far from a typical ruthless pirate, Lucian wore a flashy naval uniform, heavy makeup, and a golden wig. Panic filled his voice as he stuttered out a frantic plea for permission to land. Stunned confusion hit him next as he saw goblins and kobolds, his former enemies, living together in peace. Varkin and Rogan drew their weapons immediately, but Theron stepped forward to handle the intruder. Before tempers flared further, the remaining orc fleet appeared along the horizon. Lucian regained his confidence, assuming backup had arrived. But Rogan saw otherwise. Using his clairvoyance, Rogan uncovered a horrific truth. The sailors on those ships were mindless, reanimated corpses. Their vessels steered straight into Lucian's flagship, splintering timber in seconds. The true terror stalking the orcs finally burst from the depths as a towering column of seawater erupted. A mythical blue sea serpent, revered as the ocean's deadliest predator, rose above the waves. The monstrous beast, capable of wiping out entire armadas with one breath, locked its cold eyes on Theron. Realizing conventional weapons and basic magic were useless, Theron turned to Varkin and Rogan with grim focus. He commanded everyone to clear the shoreline and seek shelter inside the deep caverns. Theron ordered Rogan and Varkin to guide the fleeing survivors safely into the caves. Lucian remained frozen in absolute terror, unable to move a muscle. Theron had his allies haul the captain away, while the golems formed a protective wall. Before turning back, Theron handed his rare revival stones to Varkin, preparing to confront the Leviathan alone. Facing the colossal serpent head-on, Theron channeled the full energy of 8,000 magic crystals. A towering wall of fire surged outward, incinerating the undead fleet within seconds. The Leviathan plunged into the ocean to evade the blaze, then surged back up toward the shore. Theron launched blasts of lightning and ice, but the creature's thick scales repelled every outer attack. Even when the beast retaliated with a stream of blue dragon fire, Theron's barrier stood unbroken. Understanding he couldn't pierce its hide from the outside, Theron waited as the monster charged with jaws wide open. Bypassing standard magic, he called upon his Cave King authority to summon a massive, mithril-tipped rock spear. He launched the heavy stone projectile straight down the Leviathan's open gullet. A relentless barrage of additional rock pillars followed right behind it. The massive volume of stone expanded rapidly inside the beast's internal organs. Weight and force sent the giant serpent crashing onto the island's reclaimed land like a seismic tremor. Theron was nearly flung off his feet by the violent shockwave, but Squill the Slime caught his fall. Alira sprinted over to wrap him in a tearful embrace, flooded with relief that he survived. Once the heavy dust cleared, the group gathered to examine the slain monster. Grimble, the eccentric dwarf, was already clambering over the corpse, tapping scales and pulling its beard to gauge its toughness. The dead Leviathan yielded an incredible harvest: crystal-clear scales for armor, flexible blue hide, and durable bones. Its bones were as tough as forged steel, and the meat proved to be an exquisite delicacy that melted like rich butter. With the ocean threat eliminated, attention shifted to the surviving orc crewmen stranded offshore. Varkan and his team pulled 140 surviving orcs out of the burning wreckage. Rogan and the kobolds hesitated, considering Lucian's clan had waged war against them not long ago. In the end, they chose to trust Theron's leadership and put an end to the cycle of bloodshed. Theron offered the displaced orcs asylum on the island, provided they contributed their fair share of work. Overwhelmed by such unexpected mercy, Lucian tried to dive in for an over-enthusiastic thank you kiss. Squill blocked the advance instantly, and Alira cast a sleep spell to knock the orc out cold before nightfall brought a grand celebration. Goblins, kobolds, and spiders gathered around roasting leviathan meat, while the solemn orcs kept to themselves. Mourning their fallen crewmates, the orcs quietly ate wild fruit and roasted bird meat instead. What began as an empty chunk of rock had transformed into a thriving multicultural refuge. Theron sat beside Squill, watching over him tutor the young ones while Varkan shared a hearty meal with Rogan. Warmth washed over him as he realized he was no longer an exiled prince, but a founder with a real home. Nearby, his eyes caught a baby kobold struggling to lift a heavy ice axe. Chuckling softly, he scooped up the little child, moved by how eager even the youngest residents were to build their shared future. Relaxing near the crackling campfire, Theron accepted a cup of tea brewed from world tree leaves brought by Alira. Together they smiled as the tiny kobold toddler playfully nudged Theron's heavy weapon. Learning the youngster was a baby girl, they officially gave her the name Vessa. Watching the various tribes laugh and interact, Theron felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. The harsh, desolate island had truly become a thriving sanctuary for everyone. By sunrise, Lucian found himself watching Dwarf Grimble at the forge in sheer amazement. Within mere minutes, Grimble hammered out a flawlessly balanced mithril rapier. The blunt blacksmith brushed off Lucian's overly dramatic attempt at a thank you hug. Later that day, Theron gathered representatives from every race. Goblins, kobolds, orcs, and spiders. Sithra, the cave spider leader, joined them under the canopy of the World Tree. Their main focus was deciding how to use their rare treasures, an evolution-triggering demon stone and a versatile substitute stone. Theron urged caution regarding the stone's ability to restore life to the dead. He emphasized that messing with resurrection was far too grave a decision to make hastily. Before debate could begin, young Odric impulsively activated the demon-slaying stone he held, wishing for strength like Theron's. Radiant light enveloped the young orc, transforming his coarse hide into fair skin and short, dark hair that mirrored Theron's likeness. As the council gasped at the sudden change, Theron was simply relieved Torvin was safe. He quickly tossed a cloak to the newly transformed youth, telling him to put some clothes on. With a successful evolution proving the stone's dramatic magic, the council officially called the meeting to order. Theron opened the floor to discuss who should receive the next demon-slaying stone. Lucian threw his hands up to volunteer first, but the council agreed the choice must benefit the entire settlement. Rogan put forward Elder Ovrim, arguing that the community needed his wisdom and guidance above all. Though Ovrim remained modest, everyone recognized that his sharp mind and strategic foresight were irreplaceable assets. Ovrim accepted the responsibility, intending to request extended youth, mastery of magic, and wings. He hoped flight would allow him to scout the island's borders effectively before discussion shifted to the second stone. Eager to prove his value to the group, Lucian pointed out that no one understood naval navigation better than he did. He highlighted his 35 years of experience navigating treacherous waters across his 40 years of life. He argued that evolving his aquatic gifts could unlock massive opportunities for maritime trade and transport. Even stern Varkan acknowledged the captain's mastery of the waves, remembering the formidable fleet Lucian once commanded. The leaders considered how Lucian's specialized seamanship could elevate their island into a true oceanic force. Lucian acknowledged that while the island provided safety and food, they still lacked agricultural variety, advanced technology, and higher magic. Pointing to their stockpiles of raw gold and mithril, he suggested establishing commercial trade routes with foreign nations. To make high seas navigation viable, Lucian sought an evolution that would let him face oceanic dangers single-handedly. He planned to wish for wind manipulation to drive ship sails, and flight to spot storms and distant land masses early. Recognizing that his naval expertise was unmatched, Theron entrusted the final two stones to the former pirate captain. Lucian activated his stone first, unleashing a brilliant flash that reshaped the massive orc into a slender form. A stunning woman emerged with flowing brown hair and brilliant white wings. Though the transformation was not quite complete, Lucian still kept a male symbol below the waist, giving Theron quite a shock. Despite that confusing mix of features, Lucian loved his new angelic look and instantly blew kisses. Next up, Elder Overem activated his stone, transforming into a tall, muscular creature with gray skin and curved sheep horns. Leathery black bat wings sprouted from his back, giving him the terrifying presence of a legendary demon. Both Overem and the newly evolved orc Odric instantly felt a massive surge of magic coursing through their veins. With the evolutions finished, the group gathered to discuss what to do with the remaining replacement stone. Overem wanted to resurrect the Kobold Queen, restoring little Vessa's mother while gaining a powerful sorceress for the island. Selflessly, the Kobold leaders Rogan and Brannick suggested holding onto the stone instead. They argued it was far too precious to spend now, better saved as insurance for Theron, or for a greater emergency later. Theron agreed with their logic and slipped the rare artifacts safely into his pocket. To keep their growing settlement running smoothly, Theron assigned official leadership roles, naming Overem Prime Minister over law and politics. Alira took charge of agriculture and daily affairs. Varkin stepped up as Minister of Defense, and Lucian claimed the Navy Chief spot, along with self-appointed Minister of Fashion. Grimble retained his position as Master Blacksmith, training apprentices to forge top-tier equipment. Finally, Theron jokingly appointed himself Minister of Caves, so he could spend all his time mining. Heading back down into the cavernous depths alongside Squill the Slime, Theron quickly grew frustrated that walking to the surface swallowed a full 15 minutes each way. He began drafting ideas for a proper transit system, perhaps powered by mining carts or magical crystals. Interrupting his thoughts, Torvin arrived holding the hand of little kobold Vessa. The toddler had already learned to walk and proudly toted a tiny, high-grade ice axe forged just for her. Charmed by the youngster's passion for digging, Theron officially tamed Vessa, bestowing the Cave King's blessing upon her. As the bond sealed, Vessa and Torvin watched in awe as the dark cavern lit up with glowing magical pathing. Right on cue, a sudden system voice echoed through Theron's mind, announcing his Cave King title had leveled up to rank 3. Reaching rank 3 enhanced the mining light significantly, casting a glow so intense that it pierced right out of the cave entrance while granting full night vision to every tamed beast. The pitch-black tunnels suddenly shone as bright as midday for Vessa and Odric. Eager to impress the boss and earn some quick favor, Torvin grabbed his pickaxe and started digging enthusiastically alongside little Vessa. By the following morning, while watching Vessa's surprisingly fast progress, Theron struck a massive, artificial wall of solid gold. Breaking through revealed a hidden, spotless chamber lined with shimmering golden shelves and glowing pyroxene. The facility closely resembled a high-tech alchemy laboratory or winery, packed with strange piping, golden casks, and glass vats of purple liquid. Theron also spotted several shattered heartstones nearby, hinting that golems had once maintained the installation. When the rest of the leadership arrived, Lucian immediately followed his nose toward the rich aroma of fine wine. The calm moment shattered when Alira suddenly let out a piercing scream. Floating stark naked inside one of the massive glass vats of purple fluid was the dwarf himself. Once the initial panic settled, everyone realized Grimble wasn't drowning at all. He had simply figured out how the machinery worked, jumped in for a swim, and was happily chugging the vintage straight from the vat. While the orcs and goblins promptly turned the discovery into a wine-tasting party, Theron wondered how such a pristine, fully functional chamber could exist without a single visible door or entryway. That was when Alira spotted a strange, pale blue hexagonal gemstone set into the wall. Theron's Cave King skill instantly identified it as a teleportation stone, capable of long-distance spatial travel. Everything clicked into place for Theron. The former owners had simply warped directly in and out. Though instant travel could easily solve the island's transit headaches, Theron remained wary. Finding additional stones nearby might accidentally open doorways into dangerous, uncharted sectors of the subterranean ruins. Overem decided to camp out in the hidden cellar to examine the ancient machinery more closely. He soon discovered that feeding fresh grapes into the glass containers caused the automated apparatus to extract and refine the juice into top-shelf wine. Even though Theron was far too young to indulge, the prospect of producing high-end wine excited the other leaders. Before they could celebrate further, alarm spread as a massive underwater shadow began creeping toward the island's coastline. Pushing the threat aside for the morning, Theron focused on digging and hit an extraordinary vein of pure diamond. He extracted 80 massive raw gems, each dwarfing the jewels set in royal crowns back on the mainland. Between their hordes of rubies, sapphires, and precious stones, the island now possessed unimaginable wealth, yet they still lacked a skilled jeweler to cut the gems and a seaworthy vessel to trade with distant ports. Lucian was currently retrofitting the old kobold boat, but the wooden craft was nowhere near ready for deep ocean voyages. Meanwhile, as the mine shafts plunged deeper underground, walking back to the surface took well over 20 minutes. Theron worried that his commute would soon eat up an entire hour just to head home for dinner. Right as he caught himself wishing for a faster way to travel, he stumbled upon Grimble standing beside a bizarre construct. A chain of iron boxes on wheels sitting atop parallel metal rails. Despite standing there completely naked as usual, Grimble proved his genius by engineering a fully operational steam train. Theron, Torvin, and little Vessa climbed into the passenger car to test the contraption. The lead locomotive belched a thick plume of black smoke and rocketed forward at staggering speed, outpacing a galloping warhorse. The iron beast rounded tight corners and hauled itself up steep underground inclines effortlessly. A grueling 20-minute hike turned into a breezy 60-second ride. Their celebration was cut short when a mithril golem sprinted up to the tracks, frantically ringing an emergency bell to signal trouble up top. Reaching the shoreline, Theron felt an overwhelming surge of mana washing over the ocean, coming not from a lone leviathan, but from thousands of approaching sea beasts, as the ocean waves turned crimson red. The crimson tide was actually an enormous horde of razor-sharp scissor crabs. Notorious for wiping out coastal settlements, these armored crustaceans were feared far and wide. Their ironclad carapaces deflected normal weapons, while their lightning spells paralyzed defenders instantly. Allowing them to land would mean the complete destruction of the island's precious new farms. Theron rushed to the defensive line, where Alira, Ovram, and Lucian were already standing ready. Knowing the crabs were vulnerable to elemental magic, the mages unleashed a relentless barrage of fire spells. Theron acted as a living power bank, channeling his massive mana pools directly into his allies to amplify their magic. Simultaneously, the archers fired Grimble's heavy custom crossbows, punching clean through the crab's thick armor. The coordinated defense worked flawlessly, annihilating the entire wave before a single monster reached the beach. The defenders erupted into cheers upon realizing they had just secured a colossal supply of food. Scissor crab meat was considered a prized delicacy, while their razor claws could be fashioned into high-grade tools. Theron spent the rest of the night using his magical abilities to carve out a massive subterranean freezer to preserve the harvest. Shivering and utterly exhausted from casting continuous frost magic, Theron finally trudged back toward the surface. Grimble met him with the new train, now smoothly operated by a team of trained goblin conductors. Speeding toward the warm hearth of the village, Theron looked forward to a hot fire and a feast of fresh crab meat, proud that despite endless danger, his people were growing stronger and more unified by the day. Following a long night, Alira and Ovram put their refined ice magic to work, finishing up the crab processing. The mouth-watering aroma of cooked seafood drifted across the entire settlement, setting every stomach rumbling. Alira brewed a special crab hot pot infused with leaves from the world tree, creating a rich broth that surpassed the finest royal banquets. Theron was so drained from overusing his magic that his hands trembled violently, making it impossible to hold his spoon. Noticing his struggle, Alira sat beside him and gently fed him the hot soup herself. The hearty broth, combined with Alira's tender care, washed away Theron's exhaustion in seconds. Nearby, leaders like Rogan and Lucian were already sprawled on the ground, fast asleep, having overindulged during the wine-tasting celebrations. The following morning, the mining crew put Grimble's steam train right back to work. What once required an exhausting trek into the deep mines now took barely a couple of minutes. With energy to spare, the excavation team, including young Audric and little Vessa, pushed into deeper territory. Trusting her sharp monster senses, Vessa caught a strange scent hidden behind a solid rock wall. Digging through the stone barrier, Theron uncovered a cluster of prehistoric bird bones surrounding a perfectly smooth white egg. Unlike ordinary stone fossils, this egg radiated a pristine, gem-like luster. Theron pocketed the mysterious egg, wondering what kind of creature might eventually hatch from it. Later that day, Lucian called Theron down to the harbor to unveil the island's very first ocean-going ship. He had refitted the old kobold vessel into a majestic three-masted sailing ship. One major issue remained. The orcs were terrified of open water. Even with the Leviathan dead, memories of their sunken fleet made them shudder whenever they ventured far from shore. Theron refused to force them into ocean trade while fear held them back, but he knew they needed a vessel that felt indestructible, proposing they plate the hull in mithril. The metal was buoyant enough to float, yet tough enough to tank any monster's blow. Lucian doubted the logistics, but the unclothed genius Grimble flashed a thumbs up, already scheming a solution. Before tackling the project, Grimble guided Theron toward a surprise near the World Tree. Natural outdoor hot springs. The baths overlooked the glowing tree and the sea, and Alira offered to help wash his back, but a flustered Theron politely declined, insisting he could bathe himself. Despite constant threats and endless labor, the island was finally transforming into a home where everyone could relax. Though the hot spring was a welcome treat, it created a somewhat awkward moment. Most islanders were monsters who thought nothing of nudity, but Theron remained a human and former prince, feeling self-conscious bathing in front of others, especially Alira. When Overim offered to wash his back, following noble tradition, Theron gently explained that humans value personal privacy. Touched by his honesty, Alira and Overim vowed to build him a private bathhouse. As they left to start building, Theron spotted Grimble floating serenely in the warm water. Little kobold Vesa copied him nearby, back floating while carefully clutching the white egg from the mine. Theron caught a glimpse of the egg twitching, but dismissed it as a trick of his mind. Later, over lunch, Vesa joined him, still holding her precious discovery tight. The baby kobold was growing unnaturally fast, already feeding herself and obeying mining instructions. Over their meal, Theron listened to Grimble and Lucian debating the new warship design. Lucian wanted a full coat of protective mithril, but Grimble struggled to figure out how to forge it. Large quantities of mithril were nearly impossible to melt, making a single full-hull plate tricky until Theron intervened. Channeling his fire magic, he acted as a living blast furnace, liquefying massive blocks of mithril in seconds. Grimble hammered with lightning speed, shaping the molten metal into a seamless shell over the wooden hull. Astonished, the orcs realized a mithril-coated ship meant they no longer had to fear sea monsters. Right in the middle of the celebration, Lucian pointed at Theron's shoulder. Perched there was a tiny, pure white bird with bright ruby eyes, looking like a seagull at first glance, but Rogan and Brannock, the Kobold brothers, quickly recognized it as a rare white dove. And as they debated whether it was a lost pet or emergency food, Theron spotted broken white eggshells nearby. The bird hadn't flown here from afar. It had just hatched from Vesa's ancient egg. A sudden mental notification chimed in Theron's mind. The creature was a monster capable of being tamed. Surprisingly, the little dove held a greater reserve of magical energy than any of the orcs. Theron bound the creature as his companion and named her Kess. Vesa and Kess bonded instantly, acting like inseparable siblings. That evening, Theron tried feeding Kess grilled fish, but the tiny bird turned her beak away. Alira stepped in, pointing out that doves prefer grain before offering a bowl of warm broth instead. Once Alira blew on the broth to cool it down, Kess greedily gobbled it up. Watching Alira tend to the chick while Vesa scarfed down the leftover fish brought a wave of warmth to Theron's chest. His island family was expanding, and even its tiny new members carried incredible potential. Observing Kess the dove more closely, Theron realized she was anything but ordinary. Despite being newly hatched, her appetite proved insatiable, even crunching through sharp fish bones without any trouble. Overim, now in his powerful archdemon form, guessed the deep underground egg belonged to a legendary ancient breed. Regardless of her origin, Theron and Alira formally welcomed Kess into their growing family. In the days that followed, Kess and little Vesa became totally joined at the hip. Kess plumped up into a round, white fluff ball, waddling constantly in Vesa's footsteps. Eventually, growing restless in the dim caves, Kess tugged on Vesa's arm and gestured toward the surface. Deciding the little ones needed sunshine, Theron paused mining operations to take them on a grand island tour. Boarding the steam train together, Theron marveled at the rapid expansion of their underground colony. The caverns now resembled a thriving subterranean city, with meat freezers, wine vaults, and distinct tribal quarters. Grimble had even installed metal ventilation ducts to pump fresh ocean air inside, clearing away dust and sweat. Stepping into the sunlight, Theron saw the surface thriving more than ever, with expanded farmlands and a towering stone watchtower standing guard over the boundary. Though as drew near the tower, Theron froze in horror. Children from every tribe were spinning through the air high above. Theron panicked, assuming it was a cruel punishment. Until General Varkin clarified that Grimble and Sithra the spider had constructed a massive swing ride, combining unbreakable spider silk with a spinning iron frame. They had built a giant amusement attraction. Despite Theron's secret fear of heights, a lingering childhood trauma, Varkin merrily hauled him onto the ride. And while Vesa and Kess had the time of their lives, Theron barely held down his lunch, his acrophobia worse than ever. Wobbling back onto solid ground, Theron headed to the waterfront to inspect the newly built harbor. Overm and Lucian had supervised the building of 5 massive stone breakwaters to shield ships from heavy waves. The shoreline had become a popular gathering spot, where goblins, orcs, kobolds, and slimes fished side by side. Torvin waved him over, proudly displaying a bucket brimful of massive fish. Torvin mentioned that the pier waters were swarming with sea life, biting almost instantly, and seeing former enemies, laughing and competing over the biggest catch, filled Theron with pride. Lonely Rock was no longer a mere outpost for survival. It had officially flourished into a vibrant, joyful realm. Out beyond the docks, strange, colorful giant fish glinted beneath the waves. Vesa and Kess stared with wide, sparkling eyes, immediately eyeing the fish as dinner. At the far end of the pier, Overm and Sithra were hard at work angling. Sithra, the cavern spider, was impressively managing 6 fishing rods simultaneously. When Theron called out, Overm was so engrossed he didn't notice until the kids patted his back. Theron decided to cast a line too, wanting to enjoy fishing as a pastime rather than blasting water with magic. Sithra challenged him to a duel to see who could haul in the largest catch. Almost instantly, a massive strike bent Theron's rod with terrifying force. He nearly went flying into the sea before Sithra snagged his belt. Pulling together with all their strength, they dragged a heavy, boulder-like creature onto the dock. It was a dire shell, a hideous giant mollusk that immediately spat a stream of acidic purple slime. Overm stepped forward, zapping the beast with a burst of lightning magic to subdue it. As the monster died, its gruesome entrails spilled across the wood, turning Theron's stomach once again. Overm explained that despite holding the Magic King Crest, he was still mastering his immense power. Hence the overkill. While normal specimens were small and harvested for royal purple dye, this monster was freakishly massive. Gazing toward the world tree, Theron realized its ambient mana accelerated the growth of everything nearby, including sea creatures. Though giant shells meant massive profits and abundant dye, their venom was far deadlier. Grimble had once collapsed after merely tasting a tiny shell, making this giant version a serious hazard. Sithra remained unfazed, wrapping the carcass in web silk to wring out the valuable purple fluid. Overm even offered to roast the meat, but the nauseating sight sent Theron's stomach churning, so he retreated toward the world tree to recover, stepping into air that smelled like a dense, rich forest. The nearby orchards had expanded rapidly, producing heavy yields of potatoes and turnips in record time. Down the path stood a bathhouse built over the geothermal springs, featuring a private stall reserved for Theron. Exploring further, he discovered a new wooden boardwalk spiraling around the trunk, and the trio began ascending. Near the entrance, white cloth masks hung from a wooden post. Overm had warned that the tree shed a golden pollen capable of causing dizziness, so Theron cast a magical barrier around them to keep from breathing it in. Suspended by thick spider silk cables, the high walkway swayed gently beneath their feet. Midway up, they ran into Rogan and Brannick, the Kobold brothers standing guard. The guards smirked, teasing that Alira was waiting at the summit with a special surprise. Squill the slime helped a weary Theron finish the long climb. At the summit, where massive branches split, the canopy resembled a floating forest high above the clouds. Wildflowers and lush grass covered the bark, while birds rested in the golden mist. Number 15 led them into a clearing where Alira had cultivated a vibrant flower field beside a tree sap waterfall. Alira eagerly proposed building a grand royal mansion for Theron right there. She insisted that as their monarch, he deserved far better than a basic stone room. Theron gently declined, preferring to sleep close to the rest of the group. The peaceful surroundings and grueling climb caught up with Vesa and Kess, who drifted off in Theron's arms. Alira unpacked a spread of steamed fish wrapped in world tree leaves alongside fresh lemonade, and the group and everyone gathered to share a quiet meal in this high-altitude haven. Once lunch in the treetops came to an end, Theron headed back to the pier to examine the vast mountain of treasure pulled from his inventory. Piles of gold, silver, rubies, and diamonds towered well above eye level. Island residents like Varkan and Overim stood speechless before the unbelievable fortune. Even the young monster girls, Vesa and Kess, immediately began tumbling in the glittering gems. Theron simply smiled, letting the kids play after all their hard work digging in the cave. Alira teased that she felt like diving into the riches herself, while Theron calculated that this fortune could buy nearly anything in the royal capital. Lucian, the former orc captain now transformed into a beautiful human woman, ready to ship to trade at the Orc port. Theron handed Lucian a detailed trade list with crop seeds, livestock for milk and wool, and as many books on technology, cooking, and magic as could be loaded to develop the island. He also ordered Lucian to pay the ransoms of any captive kobolds or goblins and bring them to their new home. Overm suggested acquiring additional vessels if any merchant ships were up for sale. Confident in his new wind magic and the reinforced mithril hull, Lucian promised to return within 2 weeks. With a bold farewell, the vessel sailed over the horizon. By morning, Theron resumed his daily ritual of excavating the deep cavern alongside Vesa and Kess. Midway through their work, the ground beneath them began to rumble violently. Fearing a severe quake, Theron cast a magical barrier around the children. Once the shaking stopped, Vesa pointed to strange, fleshy, flower-like growths protruding from the stone wall. As Vesa struck the wall with her pickaxe, the bloom opened like a massive maw, roaring deafeningly and blasting water across the cavern. To Theron's shock, a single giant red eye glowed within the center of the maw. A deep, rumbling voice echoed as a giant scaled lizard with sharp claws squeezed through the rock. The massive creature, an earth dragon named Dern, was just as startled to find a human underground. Dern explained he had been tunneling from the opposite side of the planet for a month, only to hit the magically fortified wall of Theron's cave. Introducing himself as a traveling merchant, Dern explained he hailed from the distant continent of Ithra, so he hoped to trade exotic items unseen in this realm. Spotting a valuable ally and business partner, Theron welcomed the dragon to the surface for a feast. Gathering under the world tree, Dern displayed a monstrous appetite, devouring whole roasted birds and crunching through crab shells. He swallowed crabs whole, shell and all, while washing them down with full barrels of wine. Overm and Theron watched in awe, remembering that earth dragons were mythical beasts unrecorded in local histories. Delighted by the fresh food and warm welcome, Dern sealed the island's very first trade agreement with the subterranean world. The dragon merchant grew jovial from the wine, confessing his race had never sampled alcohol before. Pivoting back to business, Theron guided the conversation toward trade items. Dern displayed massive earthen jars, crystal-like weapons, and crafted art pieces. Art pieces forged from fire and green dragon scales. These rare materials possessed remarkable durability and heat resistance. The display immediately caught the attention of Grimble, the island's master craftsman. Dern offered 30 wyvern eggs alongside a single, priceless fire dragon egg. He explained they could serve as food or be incubated into beasts, prompting Overm to suggest raising wyverns as wyverns would grant the island unmatched aerial transport and scouting capabilities. Since Dern's home continent was a timber-scarce volcanic wasteland, Theron exchanged world tree branches and fruit to claim the eggs. Dern deigned that newly hatched dragons imprint on the first creature they see, making them easy to train. Trade complete, the merchant retreated into his tunnel with promises of future visits. The following morning, Theron built a dedicated nursery under the world tree, complete with soft down feathers and a blazing hearth. Driven to uncover more underground secrets, he arranged a mining contest with Odric and Sithra in the deepest cavern. During the match, Theron's ice axe struck a solid man-made stone wall. Odric and Sithra encountered the exact same obstacle in their tunnels, indicating a massive ancient structure buried underground. After Overm positioned guards to secure the site, Torvin broke through the stone facade. Beyond the breach lay an incredible subterranean sanctuary filled with lush grass, glowing blossoms, and tall rectangular crystals. A giant glass dome enclosed the entire garden, filtering sunlight from above despite sitting deep beneath the seabed. Sithra appeared to recognize the sanctuary, bowing her head with quiet reverence. Theron realized the glowing monoliths were actually gravestones, making this a sacred necropolis of an ancient civilization. Moments later, a squad of stone golems materialized. Unlike previous hostile constructs, these automatons stood motionless, like silent guardians. As Squill the Slime drifted toward a prominent monument, a radiant light illuminated a beautiful blonde woman clad in a royal blue gown. She introduced herself as Valeria, former ruler of the ancient Varissa Empire. She revealed that she was Squill's spirit manifested in physical form. Ages ago, her people bound their souls to slimes to survive an apocalyptic ice age. Valeria explained her empire once ruled the globe before taking refuge underground from the endless frost. only for a massive meteor to strike, striking their mountain fortress and sealing them in total darkness for 10,000 years. Theron's excavation had finally restored light to her lost realm. She conjured a floating magical map of the ancient imperial capital, highlighting a deep subterranean sector where most of her citizens remained frozen in cryogenic sleep. Valeria pleaded with Theron to keep digging toward the capital's master control core, which housed the ancient mechanisms to awaken her people and command the golems. An avid miner at heart, Theron eagerly agreed to liberate her civilization from their long slumber. Valeria warned that the city's defense golems would remain hostile until the core control nexus was offline. With the main staircases destroyed, Theron decided the safest route down was digging a gradual spiral shaft. He gathered his lieutenants beneath the World Tree to map out the operation. While the former Goblin warriors recommended brute forcing past the Guardians, Theron prioritized worker safety. He ordered them to bypass the deep vaults for now and employ proper structural mining, leading the breach alongside Torvin and Sithra, while Grimble and the Slime Squad followed behind to lay down rails, ventilation ducts, and water lines. Ahead of the descent, Theron took a brief soak in the hot spring. He felt a bit self-conscious as Squill washed his back, now fully aware that the slime carried the soul of Empress Valeria. Suddenly, alarm bells echoed across the settlement as a vessel appeared on the horizon. It was not Lucian's ship, but a warship flying the colors of the Principality of Ravenmoor. Theron informed Overman Varkin that while Ravenmoor was once a mighty empire, it was now merely a weak puppet state of King Solvane. Overman urged sinking the ship immediately to prevent news of the island reaching Theron's royal father. Theron refused, unwilling to ignite a war or harm innocent sailors. He chose to let the vessel sail on, accepting that his father might learn of the island and eventually send an armada. As the Ravenmoor ship faded into the distance, the mining project kicked off the following morning. Theron, Torvin, and Sithra carved out the spiral tunnel in synchronized precision, while Grimble laid down the railway track behind them. Number 15, the Mithril Golem, held position as vanguard with its giant tower shield to block any aggressive constructs. Though thrilled by the ancient discoveries, Theron couldn't shake his anxiety over his father's impending reaction, but Odric urged him to keep his focus on the dig. Side by side, they pushed deeper underground toward the heart of the ancient imperial city, as Theron spoke of his father with quiet fury. Though the king was a ruthless ruler who acted strictly for the realm, he was also a brilliant strategist. Since a divine oracle had granted Theron his land, he realized something crucial. The king wouldn't launch an immediate invasion, choosing to send covert spies first. To protect his people, Theron resolved to reshape the island into an unassailable fortress. Raising massive watchtowers and crafting larger golems would surely deter incoming invaders. Deep in the mines, the party shattered a rock wall and breached a massive pitch-black void. Hundreds of glowing red eyes flickered to life across floating black spheres guarding the cavern. Theron unleashed elemental fire and ice magic, but the floating stones absorbed the energy effortlessly. Their red lights shifted to blue and yellow before hurling the stored energy back in deadly beams. Seeing magic fail, Squill the Slime gestured for Theron to bring out his ice axe. Theron, Torvin, Sithra, and Mappa Golem charged straight into the floating sentinels. The constructs could swallow raw magic, but physical blows tore right through them. Theron and Sithra shattered the spheres as easily as breaking common ore. Sithra put on a terrifying display, carving through dozens of constructs with 4 lightning-fast arms. Grimble jumped into the fray, swinging his hammer while greedily sifting the rubble for rare minerals. The moment the chamber fell quiet, the ceiling parted to drop a colossal boss golem 10 times their size. Sithra struck with all her power, yet her mithril axes barely left a mark on its hide. The stone titan unleashed a wave of holy energy, nearly blasting the entire party off their feet. Direct force was useless, so Theron leaped onto Sithra's back and the spider warrior scrambled across the cavern walls, narrowly dodging the titan's lethal beam. As the construct paused to recharge, Theron dove from above, driving his ice axe straight into its glowing core eye. With the Guardian destroyed, Theron's Cave King Crest advanced to rank 4. This power boost widened his automated mining zone, allowing resource harvesting far beyond the caverns. A new workshop ability unlocked, letting him instantly mold metal and glass into any desired shape before turning to inspect the spoils. Among the debris lay golem heartstones, alongside crystals packed with raw mana. Theron appraised the black shell material, discovering it was rare magic defense stone. Remarkably, consuming this mineral granted permanent resistance against spellcraft. Grimble eagerly scooped up the fragments, envisioning brand new fortifications for the island. Inspecting the dark shards, Nella verified that they were completely safe to consume. Eating them felt like chewing on solid crystal, however. To make them digestible, the party decided to wash and grind the stones into powder. Beyond the defense stones, Theron uncovered black iron, a metal far tougher and more heat-resistant than standard steel, and magic absorption crystals, the very components that had neutralized his offensive spells. Returning to the World Tree, Theron gathered his council to distribute their massive haul. He urged everyone to swallow the crushed minerals, but after choking down a foul first bite himself, Alira offered to cook the powder into an actual meal. Shifting his focus back to construction, Theron designed a new lineage of golems. Small, magic-resistant constructs would guard the miners, while aquatic golems patrolled the coast against giant sea monsters like dire shells. Varkin proposed building a gargantuan golem taller than the World Tree to terrify any royal spies. Though Alira and Ovrim warned that such immense weight might crush the reclaimed soil, Theron valued the psychological impact of a giant guardian. To prevent land collapses, he resolved to anchor the Titan out in the surrounding ocean. He first built number 16, an amphibious fish-like golem capable of rapid swimming and land travel. Next came the main project, a towering 60-meter giant. He sculpted its torso after Varkin's powerful build, but gave it a neutral temple face to avoid making a self-portrait. Just as Theron channeled his magic to manifest the monument, Grimble darted directly in front of Varkin to strike a dramatic pose. The spell captured the wrong model, producing a massive, naked stone figure with rolled-back eyes, a slack mouth, and hands flashing peace signs. Varkin collapsed in shame, though the island's children adored the absurd creation. Mappa Golem even began mimicking the statue's goofy poses and blowing kisses, turning the site into a famous attraction. Theron chose to keep the statue, mounting a giant battle axe in its grip and jewel eyes that served as a lighthouse. Heading back down to the deep mines, Theron examined the cavern where the sentinel golem had fallen. Squill the slime revealed that the chamber was actually an advanced ancient training facility. Touching a hidden control stone allowed Squill to alter local gravity or unleash simulated blizzards and torrential downpours. Ancient imperial armies had clearly used this room and its magic-draining golems to forge elite warriors under extreme stress. To prove his point, Squill activated a rain simulation across the entire floor. Theron saw that the isolated chamber provided a safe arena for his people to practice high-level magic without collateral damage. A system test projected vivid illusions of Alira, which briefly startled Theron until he recognized it as a psychological training exercise. He officially designated the facility as the Cauldrift Training Ground, prompting Varkin and his fighters to start drilling at once. 3 days into their training, a violent explosion shook the deep mines where Theron worked. Sprinting back up to daylight, he found the open sky smothered in complete darkness. This was no storm cloud or flock of birds. It was a terrifying cloud of devil hoppers. Monstrous, head-sized grasshoppers that spat acidic mucus streamed through the air. Though typically solitary forest insects, these pests were migrating in an abnormal, overwhelming swarm that threatened to strip the World Tree and the entire island bare. Mappa Golem blasted jets of fire into the clouds, but the living tide was so thick that every gap closed instantly. Theron channeled a titanic blaze that illuminated the heavens. Even that inferno barely scratched the endless swarm. Seeing that raw force was failing, Alira proposed combining magic, soaking the insects so Ovrim could shock them all at once. The moisture would spread electric currents across the entire flying swarm. Before they could raise enough water magic, the clouds suddenly burst into a localized cloudburst. Capitalizing on the sudden storm, Ovrim and Alira hurled high-tier lightning into the drenched sky. Hundreds of thousands of fried devil hoppers tumbled into the waves like a falling wall. The crisis passed, though Theron quietly suspected Alira's latent power had summoned that crucial rain. As the goblins and kobolds cheered over the sudden feast, roasting the fallen insects over open fires, Theron grew uneasy. First the Leviathan, then scissor crabs, and now these devil hoppers. The island's rich vitality was drawing ever worse monsters to their shores. Strong walls weren't enough. He needed a long-term defense strategy against nature's rising threats. Tired yet unwavering, he headed back underground, knowing every strike of his axe brought him closer to uncovering the ancient city's secrets. On his way down, an unfamiliar tunnel caught Theron's attention, and he traced rhythmic digging noises to find Vesa, the kobold, and Kes, the baby bird, pecking away with small mithril axes. A shield golem stood nearby, quietly supervising the young pair. Even though Theron had forbidden digging at these depths, their sheer excitement to show off a new discovery melted his frustration. Vesa, always gifted at sniffing out old ruins, pointed eagerly at a blank stone face. Choosing to trust Vesa's instincts, backed by a firm nod from Squill, Theron raised his pick. A single strike of his ice axe shattered the rock, exposing a massive circular chamber beyond. Before them stood an immense subterranean library, its high walls lined with countless ancient texts. A massive central atrium plunged into deep shadows both above and below. Drawn by the sense of fresh treasure, Grimble materialized out of nowhere to join the search. The dwarf grabbed a volume from the shelf, opened it, and promptly collapsed from a massive nosebleed. Theron inspected the book, only to discover incredibly detailed, explicit illustrations that were strictly for adults. He snapped the cover shut and instructed Squill to have Overham keep the younger villagers far away. Word of the unauthorized excavation soon brought Alira to the cavern floor. She speculated that Vesa and Kes possessed rare Crest abilities for finding hidden ruins, right before the two handed Theron a specific tome. With Squill's help, Theron realized the volume was a spellbook for transformation magic. Both monsters wanted to learn how to assume human form while retaining the ability to shift back. Unfortunately, the text was written in an ancient, unreadable script. Squill gestured further down toward the island's central control unit, hinting that a translation tool might be located inside. Back above ground, Theron shared the discovery over lunch with Overham, who was thrilled. Overham had experience deciphering unknown scripts and felt confident he could decode the texts. Theron put Overham officially in charge of the library, tasking him with guarding the high tower and translating its ancient knowledge. Once the library was settled, Overham turned the conversation toward the island's overall layout. Unrolling a city planning map, he pointed out that moving the fields and hot springs to the World Tree freed up vast open land. They discussed building a school alongside specialized workshops for blacksmiths and cooks. Still, they recognized that because every resident currently shared all resources, a formal market, a traditional currency-based economy, simply wasn't required yet. For now, their main goal was reaching the control unit to unlock the island's full systems. He and Overham debated opening storefronts on the island, but since everyone shared food and goods for free, a local market was unnecessary. Overham suggested establishing a trading post strictly for outside visitors, similar to the underground merchant who had visited previously. Theron liked the concept, but feared open commerce might alert the king of Solvane, who had exiled him. While trading with the orcs via the commie was safe, finding other reliable neutral partners was tough. Suddenly, a warning bell chimed high in the World Tree. 3 massive, old-model warships were sailing directly toward the shore. They flew a yellow banner emblazoned with a black dragon, a crest Theron had never seen. Unlike standard pirates, the fleet advanced in strict naval formation. Theron met Rogan and Varkin at the pier to gauge the threat. Rogan pointed out armored troops on deck, while Varkin readied his weapon for battle. As they watched, a small rowing boat detached from the lead ship and pulled toward the dock. Raising a telescope, Theron spotted a young boy with blue hair and glasses, holding up a white flag. Flanking him was a commander with strange dragon-like ears and several armed escorts. The oarsmen were scarred slaves belonging to various races. Upon stepping ashore, the commander Vorgath barked arrogantly in a foreign tongue. The boy, Tobin, quickly translated, introducing Vorgath as a senior knight of the Dravith Dragon Kingdom. Unimpressed by titles, Varkin growled a threat, sending the terrified young translator bowing to the ground. Vorgath glared at Theron with open disdain, mistaking him for a simple miner instead of the island's ruler. Tobin explained that their fleet had been surveying the coastline when the Solvane Navy ambushed them. They were running dangerously low on rations, water, and medical supplies for their wounded. Overriding Varkin's skepticism, Theron chose to grant them aid. He offered food and healing magic on the strict condition that they disarm, unaware Vorgath was already plotting treason. The commander stared greedily at the gold adornments and massive stone statues scattered across the land. Having lost 5 warships to Solvane, he faced execution unless he returned with immense riches. Viewing Theron as a weak figurehead backed by a handful of monsters, Vorgath resolved to seize the entire island and loot its treasure. Meanwhile, Alira and the healers began attending to the injured soldiers. Varkin warned Theron that Vorgath was watching them like prey, and Theron admitted he had the same suspicion. Letting the fleet sail away meant risking an invasion force returning later. Slaughtering them immediately would mean starting a bloody war. Later, Theron met privately with Tobin. The boy confessed he was actually a traitor from the Republic of Aranthis, who had been captured and forced to translate. He confirmed the Dravith Dragon Kingdom was an aggressive, expanding empire, a warlike power currently invading territory across the sea. The revelation made it clear that these guests were no harmless castaways. They posed a direct threat to the sanctuary Theron had built. Watching from the shore, he saw another boat land. This group carried sick and injured crew members, all devoid of weapons or magical gear. Yet despite their helpless state, Theron caught sight of subtle wing-shaped ears, an unmistakable hallmark of dragon bloodline. Vorgath stepped onto the sand, unarmed, wearing a warm smile. He politely requested permission for his exhausted crew to spend a single night on land. Varkin argued against it, but Theron agreed, already laying a trap in secret. Knowing Vorgath intended to strike, Theron gathered Illyra, the mages, and the golems for an emergency briefing. He instructed them to surround the camp and stand ready to spring an ambush. Within the hour, nearly 1,000 Dragonkin soldiers had disembarked, moving in uncanny silence. Suddenly, Vorgath burst into laughter as a blinding aura enveloped his body. Expanding rapidly, he morphed into a pale blue dragon and roared at the clouds. Following his lead, the rest of the crew transformed into lesser dragons known as lindworms. Vorgath boasted of his true form, fully expecting the islanders to cower in terror, but Theron had faced creatures as massive as the Leviathan and remained completely unfazed. The moment Vorgath threatened to devour the island, Theron dropped his hand. Illyra, Ovrim, and Odric unleashed precise fire magic, instantly scorching the dragon's wings. Vorgath fired a burst of lightning at Theron, but a shield golem stepped in and absorbed the shock. Theron countered with a focused wind spell, blasting Vorgath off his feet and into the ocean. The remaining monsters charged into the fray. Varkin and Rogan swung heavy steel, while Sithra bound beasts in thick web strands. Grimble even knocked Dragonkin unconscious using his warhammer. Theron had strictly forbidden lethal force. Relying on Ovrim's research, they targeted only the wings, where the Dragonkin's magical power resided. As their wing membranes burned away, the creatures collapsed back into human form, howling in agony. Vorgath attempted to crawl back toward his ships, but a towering golem seized him by the neck. The 3 flagship vessels were hauled back to the pier, forcing the remaining crew to surrender instantly. With the battle won, Theron headed to the shipholds to inspect the captive slaves. Illyra began tending to their severe wounds, while Tobin, the young merchant, stepped forward. To express his gratitude, Tobin handed Theron an insurance document worth 300,000 dells. Theron knew that sum represented a life-changing fortune elsewhere, though his island held far greater wealth. Handing the draft back, Theron offered Tobin a contract instead. Escort the captured Dragonkin back home alongside an official letter. Given their hostile nature, Theron refused to integrate the Dragonkin or keep them as slaves. Tobin eagerly accepted the task, relieved to find a ruler who rejected slavery. However, when Tobin asked which nation Theron represented so he could file proper prisoner of war papers, Theron paused. Claiming allegiance to Solvane would only trigger further political complications. Theron officially declared the island an independent sovereign nation named Cauldrift, cutting ties with his father's realm. He convened a general assembly beneath the World Tree to map out their future. They agreed to conceal their immense riches, including the life-extending stones and mana crystals, to avoid drawing foreign fleets. Ovrim outlined an urban development plan, featuring a commercial harbor district for traders and a gated sanctuary for residents. He also recommended constructing a central palace to project royal authority. Though Theron felt uncomfortable with the title of king, the populace insisted he lead them. They compromised by leaving the royal throne vacant, operating the government as a republic for now. To guard the secret caverns, they planned to erect grand temples over the entrances, marking them strictly off-limits to visitors. Theron then handed Tobin a diplomatic missive for the Dragon Kingdom, stating clearly that their actions were self-defense and that Cauldrift desired peace. Since Tobin had lost his ship and cargo, Theron provided a vessel and hired him as a royal merchant, paying in high-purity gold coins. As the vessel pulled away, Tobin read the seal from the Cauldrift Empire, misinterpreting the phrasing and assuming Theron was a mighty emperor. With the visitors gone, Theron activated his workshop ability, instantly refining raw ore from inventory into smooth stone blocks for the city walls. As the monsters began laying mortar, Theron realized his crafting skill could replicate that material as well. By touching a sample of Grimble's mortar, Theron unlocked automated recipes for cement, mortar, and concrete directly from inventory. With this new crafting capability, they could construct their new capital faster and sturdier than ever before. Theron realized that even though he could conjure mortar from his inventory, he still needed water to mix it. Water wasn't considered a mined material, so storing liquid in his inventory was impossible. To bypass the issue, he gathered the pre-mixed mortar Grimble had prepared and stored that instead. Aiming his palm at the wall, Theron blasted mortar like a power washer, rapidly coating the stones. Sticky and quick hardening, this liquid mortar could double as a lethal trap for giant monsters. Working at this speed, the crew raised massive stone walls 5 times Theron's height in minutes. But as Grimble scaled the fresh masonry to inspect the work, a human-sized bee hovered directly behind him. Theron shouted a warning, but, confused by the shouting, Grimble merely turned around and presented his rear to the creature. The bee jabbed its stinger right into Grimble's rear, sending the dwarf tumbling off the wall in a haze. Squill caught the falling dwarf while casting healing magic as Brannick drew his bow, though the target moved too fast for arrows until Sithra, the giant spider, snared the creature in a massive web. On closer inspection, the bee, whom they named Thistle, wasn't aggressive at all. Weak and battered, she had tattered wings and a strangely swollen abdomen. Deciding to trust his instincts, Theron cast a healing spell to everyone's shock. Thistle expressed her gratitude by spitting a mouthful of thick yellow liquid right into his face. Far from an attack, the substance turned out to be sweet, delicious honey crafted from world tree nectar. Theron instantly realized Thistle was a tameable monster, and the moment he officially named her, a brilliant flash of light sealed their companion bond. Together with Alira, Theron helped Thistle build a sanctuary near the crown of the world tree. They constructed a house-sized wooden hive with hexagonal cells, where Thistle immediately began laying eggs. She had been pregnant all along, searching for a safe place to build her nest. Now a thriving colony of giant bees made their home on the island. That guaranteed Theron a reliable supply of top-grade honey and candle wax. Leaving construction to the monster crew, Theron returned to the mines alongside Odric and Sithra to locate the island's control unit. As they excavated, Sithra and Odric sensed movement behind a solid stone wall. The distinct metallic ringing of a pickaxe echoed through the rock. Breaking through the rock face, Theron uncovered a hidden chamber filled with sluggish, gray slimes. Unlike the bouncy blue squill, these gray slimes were dense and dull. One peculiar slime stood out, chipping at the wall with a stylish ice axe, though it barely managed to dislodge tiny pebbles when Theron used his monstrous strength to shatter the wall for them. He uncovered a mound of ancient skeletons. The oversized skulls matched the dwarf remnant Theron had uncovered when he first set foot on the island. These were dwarf remains. The moment Grimble stepped into the vault, the gray slimes reacted with overwhelming emotion. Some quivered in terror, while others seemed to recognize the dwarf instantly. It became obvious that these slimes held the spirits of dwarves who had lost their bodies long ago. These creatures were likely Grimble's original clan, and finding their ancestors' bones left the mining slimes paralyzed with shock. The grim find proved the history of this island ran far deeper than Theron had ever imagined. Ages ago, these dwarves had transferred their souls into slime bodies to survive a catastrophe from the sky. Yet staring at their own ancient skeletons left the slimes utterly crushed and silent. To Theron's surprise, he also discovered that despite his massive muscles and thick beard, Grimble was technically only 7 years old. While the gray slimes wallowed in despair, Grimble stepped up to take charge. He dumped a load of smithing hammers in front of them and headed straight for his forge. Crafting a magnificent golden axe etched with ancient runes, he held the weapon high. Without warning, a tremendous lightning bolt struck Grimble where he stood. The shock turned his hair pure gold, surrounding his body in crackling arcs of electricity. Squill translated the event. This was the axe of the Tyrant King, a royal artifact only a true dwarf prince could forge. Realizing Grimble was dwarf royalty, the gray slimes bowed in respect, their spirit instantly restored. They immediately rallied at the forge, lending professional dwarf craftsmanship to the island's monsters. Meanwhile, Theron headed back into the mine shafts with Odric and Sithra to track down the control unit. Digging deeper, the stone turned impossibly dense as they began uncovering meteoric iron, an extremely rare mineral fallen from the heavens. Squill voiced concern that the meteor strike might have obliterated the control unit too, but they pushed on until a warning bell chimed. Lucian, the winged merchant, had finally returned to the harbor. But he wasn't alone. A craven, a mythical sea monster with massive tentacles, was stalking Lucian's vessel. Standing guard in the harbor, the giant golem opened its maw and spat a wave of flame at them. The monster survived the fiery blast and retaliated, coiling its tentacles around the golem. In a bizarre turn of events, the golem, having spent far too much time watching the real Gremble, began letting out embarrassing, blissful moans as the tentacles squeezed it, leaving everyone on shore utterly disgusted, though the craven remained a formidable foe. Thick slime coated the monster, shielding it from Avram's lightning bolts and every other strike. Watching the golem struggle, Theron knew he had to get closer to deliver a blow. Thistle swooped down from above, dropping a heavy rope for Theron to grab. Swinging on the rope, Theron pushed past his fear of heights as Thistle dove toward the sea, enabling him to strike the creature. A massive lightning strike jolted through the sea, sending the craven thrashing into the dark waters below. Grimble's golem hauled the monstrous corpse onto the beach in triumph, as the entire island erupted into cheers, celebrating both the beast's defeat and Lucian's safe arrival. Gently lowering Theron to the ground, Thistle planted a giant kiss on him, coating his face in sweet nectar. Lucian, now transformed into a striking blonde woman by the magic stone, sprinted over to hug Theron, only for Thistle to cut her off. After some chaotic, honey-smeared antics and a playful kiss for Theron, Lucian settled back into life on Caldrift. The craven's carcass was so huge it resembled a small mountain, forcing Theron to expand the island's cavern freezers once again to fit all the meats. Lucian had traded well. Her cargo hold overflowed with wheat seed, Ravenmore crops, and exotic fruits. She also brought livestock, including cows and chickens though pigs were left behind out of respect for orc customs. Workers unloaded hundreds of books, mostly basic spell books and storybooks, since technical manuals were scarce among the orcs, though it was plenty to jumpstart Ovram's school. Most importantly, Lucian brought 200 new settlers, including goblins and kobolds rescued from captivity, who wanted a fresh start on the island. Tucked among the cargo was a high-fashion magazine from the royal capital, and while Alira and Lucian giggled over the scandalously bold outfits, Theron spotted a shocking headline. The Duke of Ravenmore had been arrested by the King of Solvane. Even worse, the Duke's daughter, Princess Aveline, Theron's former fiancée, had vanished. Despite his worry, Theron knew Aveline was capable and almost certainly had a plan. Still, he realized the king had seized complete control over the neighboring principality, which meant it was only a matter of time before royal warships set sail for Caldrift. That evening, a grand feast was thrown beneath the branches of the World Tree. Monsters gorged themselves on roasted craven meat, paired with fine continental whiskey. Varkin got the kobold Rogan so wasted that Rogan acted like an overexcited puppy, barking and licking everyone in sight. Amid the music and laughter, Lucian cautioned Theron that while they could sink a fleet, the king commanded over 1,000 ships. To prevent a slaughter, they resolved to build up their naval power as a threat, while offering to pay taxes for independence. Lucian even proposed replacing the embarrassing stone statue with a goddess golem sculpted in her own likeness. By the next morning, the island was buzzing with activity. Ovram began setting up his school, while new arrivals cleared reclaimed land for farms and housing. Meanwhile, workshops started tailoring clothes styled after the imported books. Accompanied by Squill, Theron made his way back down into the deepest caverns armed with his Cave King powers and backed by a battle-ready squad, they prepared to shatter the final barrier and reach the ancient Imperial core. Stepping through the breach, the team entered a vast, dome-shaped central vault. Right at the center stood a glowing white altar, studded with stone controls. Squill hopped onto the altar and pressed a stone key, illuminating the surrounding walls with vibrant projections. Holograms revealed thousands of naked humans of every age suspended in fluid. These were the original bodies belonging to the souls now housed inside the slimes. Noticing that dozens of pod lights remained dark, Squill realized many of his people hadn't survived the long sleep, slumping his shoulders in grief. Squill attempted to control the island's golems with the magic stones, but the terminal refused to respond. Suddenly, a chilling voice echoed through the chamber as 2 crimson lights ignited inside a dark tunnel. A self-proclaimed master strategist named Crest introduced himself with an arrogant laugh, declaring he was a god of war. Though Crest tried to sound terrifying, Theron noticed his voice was trembling with desperation. Crest attempted to summon a squad of mithril armored golems to surround the group, but they didn't budge. Theron realized Crest was watching through a hidden camera and was actually terrified. Following Grimble's lead, Theron threatened to smash open the maintenance panel under the control unit. Panicking, Crest begged him to stop, finally confessing he just wanted to feel the thrill of winning a battle for once. Theron played along and feigned defeat, prompting Krellis to burst into victorious laughter. With the trick over, the hatch popped open, exposing Krellis. Emerging from the hatch, his true form proved to be a plump, reddish-brown octopus with a human-like head. Clutched in one tentacle was a yellow translation stone that enabled him to speak their language. Squill revealed that Krellis was actually an alien princess who crash-landed in a meteorite as an infant and grew up in an aquarium. Spending her entire life devouring war chronicles, she had developed her bizarre personality. Feeling pity for the lonely creature, Theron invited Krellis to join their group on the surface. Krellis dramatically pledged her loyalty, convinced she had been hired as the island's grand strategist. Theron tried offering a translation stone to Grimble, hoping to finally hear the quiet blacksmith speak. But the silent dwarf simply tried to chew on it before spitting it out, remaining as enigmatic as ever. The light-hearted mood shattered when Squill detected a massive threat approaching. Emerging from the shadows was a giant chimera, far larger than any monster in recorded history. Krellis warned that the beast was a ravenous predator from an abandoned subterranean city, one that devoured its own kind. Squill took command of the mithril golems and ordered a direct attack, but the chimera overpowered them. With a single sweep of its serpent tail, it smashed through the construct defenses. Armor fragments shattered into deadly shrapnel, flying toward Theron and his allies like cannonballs. Krellis curled into a terrified ball as the massive monster braced to charge. While a barrier shielded Krellis, the chimera was systematically tearing the remaining golems to pieces. Desperate, Krellis proposed a tactic. Theron should hurl her at the lion head so she could paralyze it, even though, despite Theron worrying she'd be swallowed alive, Krellis insisted her plan was foolproof. Grimble grabbed Krellis by the leg, spun like a hammer thrower, and launched her straight into the air. She slammed onto the chimera's forehead, but before she could move, a serpent head snapped out from its back and swallowed her whole. Seconds later, the monster thrashed violently as Krellis flooded its insides with octopus ink. Suddenly, the creature went still and dropped to the ground like an obedient hound. A system alert flashed before Theron, indicating the chimera was now ready to be tamed. Grimble immediately began teasing the giant beast using a fringe from his grass skirt, and the chimera pounced playfully like an oversized kitten. Seizing the moment, Theron tamed the beast and named him Rufus. At Theron's command, Rufus's serpent tail spat out Krellis, dripping with digestive slime, but unharmed. Krellis insisted her secret toxins had forced the monster into submission, claiming getting eaten was part of her grand strategy. Theron officially bound Krellis as well, welcoming both her and Rufus into the party. Afterwards, the team salvaged what remained of the destroyed mithril golems, collecting 50 magic cores along with high-tier armor plating to fortify the island's defenses. Squill explained that the central terminal was too damaged to restore her people's souls to their original bodies just yet. Blaming herself, she prepared to venture deeper into the perilous ruins alone to scavenge spare parts. But Theron and the others refused to let her go unaccompanied, promising to march down together once fully prepared. Before leaving the vault, Valeria presented Theron with the imperial crown of her fallen empire. The artifact was a brilliant crystal relic designed to amplify magical power. She also bestowed upon him a royal staff, priceless mithril treasures, and a container of rare liquid metal, a unique fluid metal that could shift its color and form at will. Upon returning to the surface, the chiming of an alarm bell announced an unknown vessel approaching the harbor. A swift, unflagged merchant ship was cutting through the coastal waters, but it soon hoisted a white flag to signal peaceful intentions. Lucian and Overham boarded the ship to investigate, returning shortly with a guest. Stepping onto the pier in a broad-brimmed hat, the visitor revealed her identity as Aveline. She was the silver-haired princess of Ravenmoor, and Farron's former fiancée. She revealed that she had escaped her homeland after her father's arrest, seeking refuge on Theron's island. Aveline shared her lifelong dream of restoring Ravenmoor's golden era, a time when all races coexisted in harmony. She admitted to sending the earlier scout ship out of curiosity, but hearing rumors of the mighty world tree and a thriving community of humans and monsters, she had to witness it herself. Though she teased Theron that life was simply easier around him, her arrival brought a pivotal revelation. Aveline offered Theron a sacred crown and scepter from the ancient empire to grant legitimacy to his reign. Theron recoiled in surprise, insisting he had no desire to wear a crown. But Overham intervened. The islanders had already chosen a name for their rising domain, the Caldrift Empire. Since the leaders of each tribe were effectively ruling as kings and queens, they felt it was only fitting for Theron to hold the supreme title above them. To make matters official, a decree had already been dispatched to the neighboring Republic of Arenthus, naming him Emperor Theron. Seeing no way out, Theron accepted his new duty, declaring that while he held the title, the Caldrift Empire would operate as a republic, where every citizen shared equal rights. Predictably, this bold move set him on a direct collision course with his father, the King of Solvane. Word of Theron's survival and his defiant new nation quickly reached the royal court. While the nobility and princes raged over Theron aligning with monsters and claiming a throne, the king merely smiled, quietly amused by his son's defiance. Back on the island, Theron assembled his inner council beneath the World Tree to prepare for the kingdom's arrival. The monster chieftains, Varkin, Rogan, and Brannock, were eager for war. But Theron preferred diplomacy. Nella proposed concealing the monster tribes inside deep caverns to present a purely human settlement. But Layla stepped forward, forcefully rejecting such cowardice. She argued they should proudly showcase their shared achievement rather than cower in dark caves. Moved by her conviction, Theron reached his final verdict. He would retreat no longer. He declared Caldrift a free and sovereign realm, vowing to defend its people at any cost. If the kingdom refused to recognize their independence, he would meet them on the battlefield. The council immediately turned to evaluating their military assets, relying on a disciplined infantry corps, a coastal navy backed by aquatic golems, and the colossal siege golem, leaving them confident they could shatter any invading force. Crellis, the eccentric octopus strategist, chimed in with her own input, advising them to leverage their formidable military presence to force better terms during negotiations. Meanwhile, several counselors suggested bribing the kingdom's inspectors with piles of gold. Theron cautioned that flaunting such vast wealth would only invite greed from rival nations. Debate raged among the council regarding how best to receive the royal envoys, with a few even suggesting using Crellis's paralyzing venom to force the kingdom's diplomats into compliance. Crellis offered to secrete her specialized toxins to manipulate the envoys, but Overman Alira objected, pointing out that the crown would simply send replacements if demands weren't met. Theron decided to hold the venom as an extreme contingency, determined to prevent bloodshed. Aveline then warned that the royal court's deep-seated hatred of monsters meant neither bribes nor reason would work. They would attack on sight. To counter this, she proposed a psychological strategy: deceive the fleet into believing a massive human population coexisted alongside the monsters. Recognizing that bringing in real human settlers would take months, Aveline proposed erecting human-style housing and using her ship's crew to stage a bustling human town. Hearing this, Theron realized he could refine her plan using the adaptive liquid metal Squill had provided. Coating the mithril golems in the fluid alloy would allow him to create convincing human body doubles. Squill granted him full access to the material, and Theron prepared to descend into the ruins once more to harvest additional metal and repair the island's core terminal. Meanwhile, Aveline's crew watched in stunned disbelief as Grimble went to work. Despite being a bare-chested dancing dwarf, his blacksmithing speed and precision were superhuman. Aveline, ever composed, stood beside Theron as she surveyed the island's remarkable growth. She quietly recalled how her realm's high oracle, Crest, had once prophesied that Theron was destined to become a true king. It was an ancient prophecy coming true, though not in the way anyone had predicted. Theron officially named Aveline the island's chief diplomat. He relied on her high society experience and steady composure to navigate talks with foreign powers. Meanwhile, the island launched a massive drive to expand its human population. Lucian and Aveline set sail for the Republic of Arenthus to rally anti-kingdom exiles and forge political ties. Aveline gathered Caldrift's gold and jewels to craft lavish gifts for influential nobles. She knew all too well that wealth opens doors with merchants and politicians alike. Right before setting off, Aveline and Lucian caught Theron off guard, telling him to prepare for a wedding upon their return. A bit bewildered, Theron assumed they meant a grand victory feast for the crew and promised to get everything ready. Back on the surface, Theron tested the liquid metal on Mithril Golem number 15, and the transformation was flawless. The golem could now mirror anyone's physical look, right down to their skin texture and clothing. Seeing the golems perfectly duplicate both himself and Varkin, Theron felt confident they could populate the island with convincing human decoys. Alira apologized for thrusting the heavy weight of the Emperor title onto him, but Theron reassured her that his bond with the islanders hadn't changed one bit. With surface operations well underway, Theron headed back into the caverns to gather more materials and push the island's development forward. Theron descended into the subterranean tunnels alongside Sithra the Spider, Odric, Squill the Slime, and Golem 15, while Krellis the Octopus Strategist rode atop the golem's head to guide their path. Venturing deeper, they stepped through an archway that opened into a sprawling subterranean metropolis. The scale was jaw-dropping, packed with stone mansions, towering spires, and mountain-sized domes that made Theron's former royal capital look like a tiny village by comparison. Even deep underground, the endless cavern felt every bit as wide open as the sky above. Off in the distance, the echo of ferocious chimeras howling over territory rang through the air. Krellis warned the group that these monsters were extremely aggressive and always hunted in packs. She recalled once having to hide inside a sealed jar for an entire year just to survive their terrifying hunts. And as they surveyed the ruins, Theron noticed the city was oddly immaculate, completely free of dust or wild weeds. He spotted small slimes crawling across the walls, realizing they functioned as an automated cleanup crew left behind by the ancient builders. All at once, Theron picked up a surge of intense magical energy. A pack of 5 chimeras had picked up their scent and was closing in fast from both flanks. Before Theron could even channel a spell, the cavern ceiling flashed bright crimson. Thousands of blue cave spiders, slightly smaller than Sithra, began dropping down from above on glistening silk strands as Sithra whistled a quick command, and the spider horde launched a coordinated strike, dropping thick webbing that pinned the chimeras to the stone. With the dangerous beasts trapped, Krellis splashed her remaining venom to knock them unconscious, cold. Sithra then introduced Theron to the spider colony, and Theron thanked the arachnids for their timely intervention. The spiders signaled their desire to migrate to the surface, and Theron happily invited them to join his growing realm. He then bound the 5 paralyzed chimeras as tamed beasts, posting them at the cavern entrance as guards. Next, the party arrived at a massive vault where the liquid metal known as Riken was stockpiled. The entire chamber radiated a brilliant golden glow from the sheer abundance of metal. Without warning, the heavy vault doors burst wide as Grimble, the silent laborer, came sprinting in, completely stark naked. A bloodthirsty horde of chimeras that had slipped past the spiders was hot on his heels. Grimble skidded on the slick floor and slammed headfirst into a towering glass vat, shattering the vessel and soaking himself head to toe in the shimmering gold liquid. As Theron rushed forward to pull him out, the Riken started actively bonding with Grimble's body. Rather than dripping off, the metal fused with his muscle fibers, swelling him into a towering brute, double the height of an average man. And as Grimble flexed his new golden physique, he let out a tiny, high-pitched coo, though he quickly went silent again. He used the fluid metal to reshape his appearance, turning his simple grass skirt into tight-fitting briefs, much to Nella and Krellis's sheer embarrassment. With chimeras swarming the warehouse entrance, Krellis devised a plan to put Grimble's newfound power to work. Grimble manipulated the liquid metal to expand even further, growing to the size of a colossal golem. Squill threw open the vault doors, and Grimble stepped out into the light, echoing an unsettling chuckle. The sight of this towering, golden behemoth was so terrifying that the chimera horde scattered in absolute panic. Even the fearless cave spiders recoiled slightly at his bizarre transformation. With the horde cleared out by Grimble's intimidating new form, expedition team began securing the valuable resources for transport back to the surface. Theron and his companions rode out of the underground metropolis on Grimble's back, who had used the liquid metal to shapeshift into a massive golden serpent. Despite the dizzying momentum and Grimble's bare head poking out from the snake's snout, they made it safely back to the surface world. The island was already buzzing with energy as the blue spider colony followed them up to establish their new home. Theron immediately set to work, combining the fresh liquid metal and magic stones to construct new human-like golems. But Grimble's mischievous streak struck again, using the metal to turn into a hulking giant just to mock Varkin, before morphing into a shapely, naked woman to tease him even more. The sudden distraction caused Theron's magic to slip, accidentally creating a female golem. To his amazement, these newly forged golems possessed individual consciousness and actually felt self-conscious about their lack of clothes. Theron promptly instructed them to copy the garments worn by the crew around them. Capable of fluent speech and executing complex commands, these golems were a massive boost to the island's defenses. Among the new creations, Golem 15 truly stood out, taking the form of a handsome, distinguished noble in refined attire. He carried himself with such effortless, regal presence that the monster girls were instantly smitten. Theron immediately realized number 15 could serve as the perfect public figurehead for his empire. Meanwhile, the rest of the islanders started experimenting with the leftover liquid metal. Nella modeled her father's muscular build, while Rogan attempted to charm Vesa by shifting into a female kobold, though it backfired completely. During a quiet break, Alira used the liquid metal to temporarily take on her original, smaller goblin form. Gazing up at Theron, she softly recalled the day they first met. That wave of nostalgia and their deep shared bond finally pushed Theron past his lingering hesitation. He confessed his love to Alira, promising to stand by her side forever. And moved to tears, Alira confessed her feelings in return. Deep down, Theron vowed to surprise her one day with a proper ring and a grand wedding. Far out across the open ocean, a formidable Solvane war fleet was steadily approaching. On board were two of Theron's royal brothers, the 18th Prince Malric and the 11th Prince Silas. Malric, a prodigy archmage, was a sadistic sociopath who tortured small animals and viewed Theron as a plaything to crush. Silas, known publicly as a humble tax collector with a divine calculation crest, was in reality the kingdom's deadly grand assassin. While Silas preferred to execute their target quietly, he was deeply uneasy about Malric's unhinged, bloodthirsty nature. They were now less than a single day's sail from reaching the island. Before dawn broke the following morning, Vesa nudged Theron awake and guided him straight to the incubation hut. The clutch of dragon eggs they had purchased was finally starting to hatch. A tiny red fire dragon was the very first to break free from its shell. Though inherently powerful, the hatchling shivered with fear until Alira gently scooped it up and cradled it against her chest. As the remaining 30 wyvern eggs began to crack open, the island prepared to welcome its newest, most formidable residents. Suddenly, Vesa the kobold and Kes the baby bird burst into a vibrant aura of magical light. Using secret transformation magic learned from an ancient tome, they shifted into tiny red dragons, matching the newborn fire dragon Fenwick. They nuzzled close to comfort the hatchling, who felt safe enough to drift off to sleep. Alira and Theron watched in sheer awe, but the morning surprises weren't over yet. Vesa and Kes closed their eyes once more, shifting their forms into young human girls. Vesa took the form of a little girl with short white hair and soft dog ears, while Kes morphed into a maiden with flowing silver hair and feathered white wings. Though slightly pouting that their fluffy tails still popped out, they were thrilled to call Theron Dad and help Alira, whom they affectionately called Mom, manage the dragon nursery. Theron officially bonded with the baby dragon, naming him Fenwick, but realized the island's family was expanding far faster than he could ever keep up with. By that afternoon, little Fenwick was already growing at an astonishing speed, gulping down whole fish and even taking his very first clumsy flight. Content that the young dragons and wyverns were in great hands with the transformed Vesa and Kes, Theron headed back down into the deep mines. Rejoining Sithra, Audric, Krellis, and Grimble, he pushed ahead with the mission to repair the island's central control units. Navigating through the underground city, the group was stalked by an eerie, low rumble echoing in the dark. A heavy groaning sound reverberated through the cavernous tunnels. The cave spiders cowered in fear, and even the aggressive chimeras had completely vanished. Without warning, a colossal creature lunged out from the darkness at terrifying speed. It bore the body of a lion, but possessed the face of a bald, bearded old man with a mournful expression. Krellis recognized it as a manticore, a beast far smarter and deadlier than any chimera, famous for firing poisonous spines from its tail. The manticore unleashed a storm of magical stingers, but Theron's barrier held firm. Baffled by the invisible barrier, the beast charged headfirst into the shield and knocked itself cold, landing on its back in pain. While the others stayed on guard, Grimble felt an odd connection to the naked, human-faced creature. Stepping forward, he soothed the crying manticore and offered it some dried fish. The beast settled down instantly, allowing Theron to form a taming bond. Dubbed Zathra, the manticore became Grimble's trusted new mount. Its terrifying presence served as a perfect deterrent to keep other monsters away while they worked. Guided by Squill, the team finally reached the main control facility, a sprawling, cone-shaped building. Stepping inside, they found the shattered remains of several mithril golems strewn across the floor. Squill grieved over the heavily damaged control pipes, but Grimble stepped up to help. After inspecting the machinery, Grimble confirmed he could repair it using the scattered mithril and Theron's fire magic. Just as repairs began, heavy metallic footsteps echoed through the hall. A towering guardian clad in golden armor appeared at the entrance. Unlike the friendly golem Squill had encountered before, this construct radiated sheer hostility. Without warning, it raised its hand and unleashed a violent burst of flames at the party. Squill panicked as she realized she no longer held authority over the guardians in this sector. This golden golem operated under a completely different, higher-tier set of commands. Theron engaged the golden golem, spotting 5 embedded magic stones where its mana was concentrated. Torvin reinforced Theron's magical shield, giving Theron the opening to blast back with overwhelming flames. Yet the golem raised its own shield, relying on its magic-resistant body to absorb the blow. Zathra, the newly tamed manticore, roared and lunged at the machine, while Sithra pinned it down with spider silk. As the golem tried to cut through the webs, Zathra landed a heavy strike that slammed the guardian into the stone wall. Before it could recover, Theron swung his pickaxe and instantly stored the entire golem into his inventory. Inspecting the loot, Theron gathered high-grade orichalcum and magic-absorbing crystals. Instead of a standard synthetic core, he discovered a true heartstone, a broken core capable of granting golems autonomous free will. Grimble made quick work of repairing the damaged pipes inside the control room. Meanwhile, Theron set up enchanted shield stones to protect the area from future attacks. With all systems restored, Squill initialized the central control unit. Hidden walls opened up, revealing containment tanks filled with humans fused with slimes. As the fluid drained, the captives awoke in their true human bodies, overcome with relief. Squill chose to maintain her slime form for now, to help the humans regain their memories and adjust. Returning to the surface, Theron met up with Alira and Ovram near the World Tree. Together, they discussed expanding the farmland to feed the growing population. Theron then used his crafting skills to give the Heartstone a new body, choosing a golden, fish-shaped doll as a base. The doll awakened as Anselm, speaking with the collective memories of an ancient imperial citizen. Anselm explained that the golems had gone rogue to protect humanity from the king of the underworld. He described a terrifying, fire-breathing entity living in a subterranean lake who harbored a deep hatred for humans. The automatons feared that activating the control unit would draw the tyrant's wrath. To avoid a disaster, Squill temporarily put the machinery on standby. Theron resolved to meet this king of the underworld face to face and clear up the misunderstanding. Gathering Anselm, Squill, and Number 15, he traveled deep into the Black Rock caves. They eventually reached a mystical underground sanctuary where sunlight illuminated vast grasslands and a shimmering lake. Suddenly, a booming, low voice echoed across the cavern. The king of the underworld had spoken. Theron apologized for taking the magma, but the entity seemed far more bored than angry. The voice revealed that he had been trapped underground for tens of thousands of years. To cure his boredom, the king summoned a dragon of living fire and challenged Theron to a fight to the death. Theron refused the battle, offering instead to help the king escape his prison. The king of the underworld sighed, explaining that his true body remained locked behind a massive rock face that couldn't be broken from within. Guided by his cave king instincts, Theron walked directly toward the rear cavern wall. Veloth, the king of the underworld, mocked him, claiming thousands of years of his ultimate flames couldn't scratch that seal. Ignoring the taunts, Theron swung his ice pickaxe, shattering the ancient barrier in a single blow. Beyond the broken wall stood a colossal red dragon before a sea of boiling lava. Veloth's true body. Veloth stared in shock, unable to comprehend how a simple tool had broken an eternal seal. Checking his inventory, Theron realized the wall was composed of sealing stones. According to his records, these unique stones could only be broken by the Cave King. Spotting the crest etched on Theron's hand, Veloth panicked in fear. He assumed Theron had come to execute him for usurping the title of king. Theron quickly calmed him down, explaining his peaceful intentions and causing Veloth's demeanor to flip instantly. Realizing he was dealing with the true Cave King, Veloth tried to put up a tough front again. Unimpressed, Theron pulled sealing stones from his inventory and instantly rebuilt the wall, trapping Veloth once more. Terrified of returning to absolute pitch-black solitude, Veloth burst into tears and begged for mercy. He offered his total allegiance to Theron, triggering a system message that confirmed the legendary dragon could now be tamed. Theron accepted the bond, officially recruiting the legendary demon king of the Inferno into his group. As they talked, Veloth explained that the original Cave King was a feared ruler who had entrusted the sealing stones to a hero long ago. Veloth added that his homeland was the Ythra continent, a name Theron remembered from Dern, the Earth Dragon merchant. Regrettably, Theron had to inform Veloth that his homeland was now a wasteland, ruined by constant dragon wars. Heartbroken, Veloth begged Theron to take him home so he could put an end to the fighting. Theron agreed to help, but told him to wait until Lloyd returned so they could map out a proper strategy. To pass the time, Veloth offered to mentor the group in high-tier fire magic. Returning to the surface, the dragon went to introduce himself to the village leaders. Rather than staying in his monstrous dragon form, he assumed a human appearance. He morphed into a tanned woman with long red hair to appear more approachable. Eager to demonstrate his strength, Veloth fired a hell explosion out toward the open sea. The attack appeared as nothing more than a tiny red dot at first, but once it touched the horizon, it triggered a massive explosion that shook the island and whipped up a giant tidal wave. Theron threw up a powerful magical shield to protect everyone from the incoming fallout. Unbeknownst to them, a royal battleship was navigating nearby waters. Prince Silas and the court mage Malric were aboard, heading directly toward the island. The shockwave from Veloth's blast nearly flipped their vessel, snapping the masts and tearing the sails to shreds. While Malric tried to write it off as an underwater volcano, Silas felt a deep sense of dread, viewing it as a clear warning to stay away. Severely damaged and taking on water, the royal fleet was now struggling just to stay afloat. Their mission to the island came to a screeching halt, crushed by a single display of the dragon's power. The royal battleship was left in ruins from the collateral shockwaves of Veloth's spell. With 3 masts snapped and the hull leaking from multiple breaches, panic gripped the crew. Prince Silas was forced to roll up his sleeves and help the crew with manual repairs. His younger brother Malric pointed out that their desperate situation was actually a perfect cover. They could now approach the island posing as shipwreck survivors, knowing Theron's soft heart wouldn't allow him to turn away people in need. Back on the island, Veloth began teaching fire magic to the residents. He stressed that casting spells depended far more on mental visualization than reciting words. Theron decided to test out the Hell Explosion spell, aiming high into the open sky to be safe. To everyone's shock, the spell didn't just detonate with fire. It turned the entire sky pitch black, releasing a massive wave of dark energy. A wide-eyed Veloth warned Theron that his raw power was so immense he could accidentally destroy the planet if he wasn't careful. Overm the Magic King tried the same spell, and though smaller, it still dyed the sky pitch black. Lightening the mood, Veloth demonstrated firebombs, a celebratory variation of the spell. Sparks shot into the air, bursting into brilliant fireworks. Delighted villagers joined in, putting together a lively fireworks display. Meanwhile, Fenwick the baby dragon took to Veloth, sensing a link to her homeland. Veloth gazed at the hatchling with mixed sadness and affection, fully aware of the dragon tribe's hardships back on the Aether continent. During training, Veloth sensed an unusual magical presence approaching from the sea. Through a Leviathan-scale telescope, Theron spotted the royal ship limping toward the pier. He immediately put the island on high defensive alert. Non-combatants evacuated to the caves, while warriors rallied at the docks. Seeing the ship in total tatters, Theron wondered if pirates or monsters had attacked them, unaware that his own group's target practice had caused the damage. Aboard the approaching warship, Silas froze at what his telescope revealed. In 3 short months, the barren reef became a fortified city, anchored by a massive, ancient tree. Initial reports claiming Theron was banished to a desolate wasteland were completely wrong. Seeing heavy defenses, Silas ruled out a direct assault and stuck to playing helpless victims. But Malric's mind began to unravel. Humiliated by the overwhelming magic radiating from the island, Malric felt fear unlike anything before. In a sudden frenzy, Malric turned his wind magic against his own crew, severing limbs and inflicting gruesome wounds. When a horrified Silas tried to stop him, Malric insisted these sacrifices made their fake shipwreck story believable to Theron. Silas realized his brother had turned into a lethal liability. Before he could react, Theron's boat closed in to inspect the bloody deck. Realizing their ship was finished, Silas and Malric doubled down on playing the helpless victims. As Theron's vessel pulled close, Silas barked orders to treat the wounded, while Malric tracked Theron with a disturbing grin. Fascinated by his array of allies, Theron boarded the battleship alongside Krellis and Torvin. Concealing his power and carrying no weapons, Theron made sure not to appear hostile. He brought a mixed force of humans, goblins, and orcs to display the island's diversity. Inspecting the wreckage, Theron noted the damage looked magical rather than naval combat. Silas instantly leapt onto Theron's boat, feigning shock and relief that his brother was alive. He claimed a pirate attack had struck their secret, high-value royal mission. Unimpressed by the show, Theron demanded to inspect the warship. On deck lay a grim scene of maimed sailors. Silas blamed a notorious pirate fleet, but Theron knew that fleet was already defeated and nowhere near these waters. Calling out the lie, Theron pointed out those exact pirates were now living peacefully on his island. Caught red-handed, Silas pivoted, claiming they were pursuing Theron's former fiancée, Princess Aveline, only for Theron to drop the bomb that Aveline had already visited and left. Silas felt his whole web of lies collapsing around him. Brushing past the excuses, Theron focused entirely on treating the wounded crew. Disgust took over as he found Malric sitting idle, refusing to use sage magic on dying men. When confronted, Malric scoffed arrogantly, claiming commoners were beneath his concern. Unleashing his true aura, Theron pinned Malric with magical pressure so heavy the sage broke out in a cold sweat. Realizing Theron was now leagues ahead of him, a terrified Malric finally scrambled to treat the wounded. The damaged warship was towed to the docks, and its crew moved into a secure warehouse. Theron agreed to supply food and fix the vessel, but made one thing clear. The royal visitors were strictly confined to the warehouse perimeter. Silas tried laughing it off and flirted with Alira, but Theron stood firm. To keep Silas in check, Morva, a bearded female golem famous for aggressive affection, was assigned as liaison, promptly seizing the panicked prince and hauling him away. Discussing options with Overum, Theron planned to send Silas back with a peaceful offer for the king. Yet, knowing Malric was a volatile hazard, Theron stayed posted near the docks until repairs concluded. Overum confirmed Malric's magical reserves were massive, though he and Alira could handle him if things turned ugly. Theron stayed vigilant, aware of Malric's instability and violent impulses. As Overum rushed warship repairs to clear the island, Theron observed from a tower where Crest reported to him. Using her medical skills, she had subtly poisoned the wounded crew to loosen their tongues. She confirmed Malric and Silas were supreme commanders sent by the king to investigate. Watching nearby, Varkin noted Malric seemed paralyzed by the island's ambient magic, likely because his sage crest revealed just how hopelessly outmatched he was. Crest added that the crew lived in terror of Malric, who treated them like disposable dirt. A young goblin worker carried a platter of food to the warehouse. Morva stood post beside the timber warehouse doors. Malric stared at the simple earthenware bowl with intense disgust. The sight of a lowly monster offering him food shattered the remaining self-control of Malric. Screaming in unhinged fury, Malric blasted the poor goblin. The sudden gale shattered the stone platter and hurled the helpless goblin worker across the cobblestone courtyard. Silas lunged forward to grab his brother's sleeve, shouting an urgent warning about the island's overwhelming power. Shoving Silas into the wooden crates, Malric glared with rage. Channeling the sage crest on his right hand, Malric conjured a swirling storm of razor-sharp wind blades. Morva stepped forward to shield the frightened workers. The dense wind projectiles shredded the stone armor of Morva, blasting deep cracks across the heavy chestplate of the Guardian. Varkin drew 2 steel axes and charged. A concentrated gale spell from Malric slammed Varkin backward into the wooden perimeter fence. Hovering high above the roof, Malric raised his arms toward the sky. Overwhelmed by hubris, Malric began absorbing environmental mana from the air to manifest a catastrophic firestorm spell above the harbor docks. Silas scrambled through the splintered timber, watching the sky in total horror. Overum and Alira raised glowing protective magic barriers. Before the mages could finish casting, a heavy physical pressure settled over the pier as Theron arrived near the harbor. Theron walked calmly toward the storm, carrying his shimmering mithril ice axe. Spotting his brother on the path below, Malric redirected the entire fiery inferno straight at Theron. A roaring column of flame engulfed Theron, scorching the cobblestones and blinding the onlookers across the plaza. Silas shielded his face with both hands, assuming no human could survive a direct hit from high-tier sage magic. As the smoke cleared, Theron stepped out of the flames, completely unharmed behind an invisible Cave King barrier. Malric gasped in disbelief, frantically channeling his remaining magic reserves for another attack. Raising his palm, Theron activated his spatial inventory skill to swallow the incoming mana. The swirling fire dissolved into thin air, leaving Malric gasping for breath. Theron leaped high into the air, closing the distance to Malric in a single second. With one swift swing of his ice axe, Theron shattered the magic barrier of Malric into glowing dust. Theron grabbed Malric by the collar and slammed him onto the stone plaza below. The heavy impact knocked the breath from Malric, leaving him sprawling in the dirt. Before Malric could crawl away, Theron unleashed his crushing Cave King aura across the entire stone plaza. The sheer physical weight of the aura pinned Malric flat against the paving stones, making movement impossible for the sage. Theron summoned a dozen mana-suppressing crystals, driving them into the ground around the fallen target in a precise circle. The glowing crystals formed an instant containment circle that drained the remaining power of Malric, rendering him completely helpless. Malric burst into tears, squirming helplessly beneath the heavy aura of Theron. Squill bounced onto the shoulder of Theron, watching the broken sage sob in the dirt. Silas walked slowly onto the open plaza, dropping to both knees before Theron. Silas pressed his forehead flat against the cold stone floor in complete submission. Varkin and the goblin guards surrounded the plaza, holding steel weapons in silence. Theron looked down at Malric, raising a hand to signal the surrounding guards. Kneeling beside his brother, Silas kept his face pressed against the stone, without moving a muscle in the imposing presence of Theron. Alira stepped forward with a potion bottle to tend to the injuries of Varkin and the injured goblin worker. Morva inspected her cracked stone torso, nodding to Theron that her core was safe. Theron ordered 2 mithril golems to step forward and lift Malric from the dirt. The tall silver golem seized Malric by the arms, dragging the weeping sage toward the subterranean cellars below the courtyard. Silas remained on his knees, staring down at the stone floor as the guards walked past. Krellis observed from the watchtower window, writing on a parchment scroll. Ovram leaned on his staff by the outer fence as the silver guards marched past in double file. Theron stood beside Alira under the evening sky, watching the quiet courtyard. Silas slowly unclenched his trembling hands, remaining bowed in the dirt before Theron as the silent crowd watched the broken commander. The silver golems dragged Malric across the plaza behind him, and Silas did not turn his head. Theron turned the mithril ice axe over once in his hands and set the head down against the stone. Silas slid one hand slowly inside his coat, keeping the others spread open and still. Varkin drew 2 steel axes, stepping forward to protect Theron. Silas slowly pulled out a heavy black iron scroll case bound with a red silk ribbon from inside his dark leather tunic. Silas placed the iron case onto the stone plaza before Theron. Raising his right palm, Silas activated his divine calculation crest. Glowing blue mathematical numbers materialized in the warm evening air above the open palm of Silas in midair. The blue calculation runes projected a 0% probability of the Solvane Kingdom ever conquering the heavily fortified island domain of Caldrift. Theron stepped forward and picked up the iron scroll case from the paving stones. Theron snapped the red silk ribbon and unrolled the heavy parchment scroll from inside the black iron container. The document displayed the secret royal assassination decree signed by the King of Solvane himself before the fleet set sail. Silas reached into his sleeves, drawing 2 poison daggers. Silas placed both poison daggers on the stone floor beside the parchment. Krellis walked down from the watchtower with her parchment scroll. Theron handed the secret royal decree to Krellis for immediate inspection. Examining the encrypted royal seal, Krellis verified that the secret parchment originated directly from the High Royal Court Palace of Solvane. Ovram stepped forward, analyzing the lingering magic aura on the ancient parchment scroll. Ovram nodded to Theron, confirming the authentic signature of the king. Silas pointed to the secret clauses on the parchment, highlighting the order to execute Malric if the sage disobeyed. Varkin lowered his steel axes, stepping back from Silas. Theron looked down at the surrendered daggers and the secret decree. Silas unbuckled his heavy leather assassin belt and placed it onto the stone plaza floor. Squill bounced onto the shoulder of Silas, watching the assassin closely. Theron activated his spatial inventory skill, storing the royal decree inside his inventory. Theron extended a hand to Silas, gesturing for him to rise from the cold stone ground. Silas stood up slowly, bowing his head before Theron and Alira. Alira stepped forward, offering a wooden bowl of hot world tree tea to Silas. Silas took the bowl with both hands and drank the warm, sweet herbal tea in silence. Morva stepped up and patted the shoulder of Silas with her heavy stone hand. Silas stumbled forward from the force of the pat, making the nearby goblin guards smile. Krellis unrolled a map of the ocean, asking Silas about the naval positions and warship routes of the Solvane Kingdom. Silas pointed to the map, marking the exact supply routes and warship harbors of the royal fleet across the sea. Krellis wrote down every strategic detail on her parchment scroll. Theron nodded in approval as Ovram inspected the drawn naval routes. Ovram invited Silas to visit the High Library Tower to assist in translating ancient royal texts from the archives. Silas bowed to Ovram, accepting the invitation without hesitation. Varkin collected the poison daggers and the assassin belt from the plaza floor quietly. The goblin guards sheathed their steel weapons, opening a wide path through the courtyard for the entire group. Theron walked alongside Silas toward the center of the settlement. Silas looked around at the stone buildings, the hot springs, and the smiling monster families in the courtyard. Little Vessa ran past, carrying her small ice axe alongside Kess, the white dove, under the warm evening sun. Silas watched the children play under the glowing canopy of the world tree. Ovram and Alira walked beside Theron, discussing plans to expand the subterranean settlement beneath the island. Silas offered to instruct the island guards in calculation methods and stealth tactics during future patrols. Theron welcomes Silas into the community, gesturing toward the World Tree. The setting sun casts long, golden shadows across the stone plaza and the harbor docks. Standing beside Theron and Alira, Silas watched the quiet sea in peace. Silas unclasped his trembling hands, standing at ease beside his brother Theron as the cool ocean breeze swept through the courtyard. The onlookers watched Silas stand shoulder to shoulder with Theron under the evening sky, fully accepting the supreme authority of the Caldrift Empire. A swift courier ship landed at Solvane Harbor. A royal messenger stepped onto the quay. Guards opened the bronze doors of Solvane Palace. Banners of the Sword God hung along the throne room. Vane stood near the altar with his staff. The royal ministers stood along the marble hall, murmuring in low voices about the missing fleet. 2 empty thrones reserved for Malric and Silas remained completely vacant at the front of the court. Vane sneered while watching the messenger kneel before the high dais in front of the throne. The messenger unsealed the black leather tube, pulling out a heavy parchment scroll bound with red ribbon. Caldus sat upon the golden throne, looking down at the messenger in absolute silence from the high dais. The messenger handed the parchment scroll to Vane for immediate inspection before the court. Unrolling the heavy document, Vane adjusted his golden spectacles to read the opening script. The parchment bore the official crystal wax seal of the Caldrift Empire, glowing with magical light. Vane read the opening lines, his pale hands beginning to tremble before the assembled ministers. The letter declared Caldrift an independent sovereign realm under the supreme authority of Theron. The document detailed how Malric had attacked the island settlement and suffered a complete defeat. Vane read the clause, stating that Malric and Silas were bound in subterranean prison cells beneath the island, surrendering all authority as royal commanders. Gasping in disbelief, the high ministers looked at the vacant thrones of the absent princes across the room. Vane shouted in rage, declaring Theron a dangerous traitor who had disgraced the royal crown. The crest holders who had mocked Theron during his exile glared across the marble hall in utter shock and fury. Andrek stepped forward, slamming his heavy iron gauntlet against the stone balustrade in outrage. The high court nobles demanded immediate military retaliation against the distant island domain across the ocean. Caldus remained motionless on his throne, studying the glowing crystal seal on the parchment scroll. Raising his hand, Caldus quieted the screaming ministers in a single instant. Caldus declared that no exiled royal child would ever defy the throne of Solvane. Caldus ordered the immediate mobilization of the Grand Imperial Fleet across the sea. Drake stepped forward, bowing deeply before Caldus. Caldus commanded Drake to crush the defenses of Caldrift and capture Theron alive. Trumpets echoed across the palace courtyards, signaling the royal call to arms across the city. Heavy iron gates swung open along the naval armory down at the stone harbor. Hundreds of armored knights marched down the stone ramps toward the waiting warships in strict military formation. Supply wagons loaded with ballistas and catapults rolled onto the wooden docks beside the bay. Sailors hauled heavy iron anchor chains onto the wooden decks of 30 royal flagships. Drake boarded the central warship, raising the golden banner of Solvane above the deck. Vane stood on the harbor seawall, chanting ancient blessings over the departing fleet. Royal mages boarded the lead vessels, channeling elemental mana into the sails to catch the offshore ocean breeze. Rows of heavy wooden oars splashed into the harbor waters in synchronized precision. The flagship unfurled its massive white sails, catching the strong offshore wind. Dozens of war vessels glided out of the bay in tight naval formation toward the open sea. The coastal guards watched the Grand Armada leave the harbor behind under the evening sun. Drake stood at the helm, peering across the open ocean through a brass spyglass. The sun sank beneath the ocean horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of crimson. 30 war vessels cut through the dark ocean waves in steady alignment. Royal archers patrolled the wooden decks, inspecting their heavy longbows in silence. The lead warship crashed through heavy sea spray, surging westward across the ocean waves. Vane watched from the high palace balcony until the sails vanished into the distant horizon. Caldus sat alone in the dark throne room, staring down at the letter from Theron. Dark storm clouds gathered over the sea, shadowing the advancing royal fleet as lightning flickered across the sky. Drake signaled the armada to maintain full speed through the rising swell, driving the warships westward across the storm-tossed waters. The 30 royal warships crested a massive wave, sailing directly toward the distant domain of Caldrift under the dark sky as the entire fleet advanced. 30 royal warships emerged from the dark storm clouds above. Drake stood on the central warship deck, waving a steel sword to command the immediate harbor assault. Sailors hoisted wooden pitch barrels onto heavy catapult buckets. Armored archers lined the wooden gunnels, aiming flaming arrows toward the timber docks of Caldrift Harbor. Veloth stepped beside Theron on the high cliff, looking out at the fleet. Flames flickered across the red eyes of Veloth, radiating intense heat across the stone watchtower platform. Veloth offered to unleash a hell explosion to incinerate the 30 royal warships and drown the entire Imperial army in seconds across the bay. Theron looked down at the harbor, refusing to commit a massacre. Placing a hand on Veloth's shoulder, Theron ordered him to hold his fire. Veloth snorted in annoyance, extinguishing the bright fire radiating across his open, outstretched palms. Drake gave the command, launching a massive salvo of burning boulders toward the crowded shoreline. Flaming rocks crashed into the stone plaza, sending sparks across the courtyard. Morva stepped directly in front of the fleeing goblin children, absorbing a heavy catapult boulder with her reinforced stone chestplate. Deep cracks spread across the stone torso of Morva, but the loyal guardian golem remained standing firmly. Varkan drew his steel axes, gritting his teeth as heavy iron ballista bolts slammed into the wooden barricades. Rogan held back his kobold archers in total silence. Illyra raised a wave of ocean water, extinguishing the pitch on the farmhouses. Ovrum channeled a defensive barrier over the World Tree's nursery. Heavy stone fragments from a catapult impact struck the bare arm of Ovrum as he maintained the magic shield. Squill spread soft slime under a collapsing frame to cushion falling timber. Silas watched from the courtyard floor, marveling at the incredible self-restraint of the island defenders. Krellis observed the naval barrage from her window, taking down notes. Theron leaped down from the high stone wall, landing on the cobblestones below. Raising his right palm, Theron activated his spatial inventory skill to swallow incoming iron bolts mid-air. Theron raised a Cave King barrier on the pier. Burning catapult stones shattered against Theron's shield. Drake stared through his brass spyglass in absolute shock as every naval projectile failed to land. Catapult crews reloaded and fired into the barrier. Maintaining the massive barrier drained the mana reserves of Theron, causing his knees to tremble in the dirt. Illyra stepped beside Theron, channeling magic to reinforce the outer barrier. Veloth watched Theron bleed from his palm in total silence as he held the barrier. Two stone golems collapsed into rubble on the pier after catching stray shells. Morva knelt in the dirt, her stone chest cracked but firm. Goblin and kobold families huddled quietly inside the subterranean shelters, listening to the thunderous impacts echo across the rocks outside. Varkan stood his ground beside the fence, refusing to retaliate against the soldiers. Drake ordered his catapult officers to halt fire, realizing no damage was reaching the settlement. Silence settled over the calm harbor waters once more as smoke drifted. Theron stood panting on the scorched stone pier in silence, his ice axe resting against the cobblestones. Veloth stood shoulder to shoulder with Theron on the stone cliff platform, looking out across the quiet harbor. Drake lowered his brass spyglass, stunned by the absolute mercy and overwhelming strength of Caldrift. Royal archers along the ship deck slowly lowered their heavy longbows in awe, staring at the glowing shield. Silas walked slowly onto the open stone pier, stepping past the scorched timber to gaze out across the water. Silas recognized that Theron possessed the power to destroy the fleet, yet chose to protect human life at great personal cost under pressure. Illyra stepped forward and handed a small glass vial of healing potion to Theron, her face filled with quiet concern. Morva gave a slow nod to Theron, confirming that her core was intact. Krellis recorded the peaceful outcome of the naval encounter on her scroll from the high watchtower window. Ovrum stood beside the World Tree under the evening sky, lowering his staff as quiet settled over the island. Theron looked across the water at Drake, offering peaceful negotiations without drawing royal blood. Standing stoically on the scorched plaza, the defenders of Caldrift displayed their resolve under the evening sky. Drake stood frozen on his deck, completely unable to order another attack against the island domain. Drake lowered the landing ramp of the flagship as a tall warrior stepped onto the wooden pier. Corrin walked ashore, wearing golden plate armor engraved with the glowing mark of the sword god Crest. Silas and Drake watched from the dock in silent apprehension as the warrior advanced. Corrin unsheathed a massive golden broadsword, pointing the blade directly at the chest of Theron. Theron stood calmly on the stone plaza, holding his shimmering mithril ice axe. Corrin raised his broadsword, declaring that a pathetic cave king Crest could never withstand the sword god mark. Corrin swung his golden broadsword, unleashing a roaring wave of golden sword aura across the cobblestones. Theron raised a Cave King barrier, absorbing the fiery impact as red sparks sprayed across the plaza. The massive physical force of the divine blade pushed Theron backward toward the edge of the stone cliff. Corrin boasted that on open ground, no warrior in the kingdom could match the range of his divine sword aura. Theron smiled calmly, realizing open surface terrain favored the long-range aura of the sword god Crest. Theron drove his mithril ice axe into the bedrock, activating his domain manipulation to shatter the stone floor. The stone plaza collapsed downward with a thunderous roar, plunging both Theron and Corin into the dark subterranean cavern shaft below the courtyard. Silas rushed to the edge of the pit, looking down into the subterranean darkness in total panic. Corin landed heavily on the cavern floor, raising his glowing broadsword in the dim underground light. The Crest guidance system resonated in the mind of Theron, announcing that subterranean stat boosts were active. Glowing white markers appeared across the cavern walls, highlighting prime strike points and enemy weakness. Theron felt his physical strength and speed multiply as his Cave King crest radiated intense blue light. Corin lunged forward through the darkness, swinging his golden broadsword with all his remaining strength. The heavy subterranean mana of the cavern suppressed the golden aura, weakening the reach of the blade. Moving with incredible speed boosted by his underground crest perk, Theron easily evaded the heavy swing. Theron struck the highlighted strike point on the golden broadsword with one precise blow of his ice axe. The legendary sword god blade shattered into a shower of glowing golden fragments across the tunnel floor. Corin gasped in horror, staring at his broken hilt in absolute disbelief. Theron unleashed his crushing Cave King aura, slamming Corin flat against the floor. The physical weight of the subterranean aura pinned Corin against the paving stones, rendering any movement completely impossible for the fallen prince. Theron drove a dozen mana-suppressing crystals into the cavern floor around the fallen target in a precise circle. The glowing crystals formed a containment ring that drained the remaining magical energy of Corin instantly. Corin lay helpless in the dirt, realizing his divine sword god mark had failed against the subterranean domain. Theron activated his workshop skill, shaping a stone platform to lift them back up toward the daylight. The automated stone elevator rose through the shaft, carrying Theron and the bound prince onto the plaza. Emerging onto the open pier, Theron stood victorious beside the defeated sword god commander. Drake dropped his steel sword onto the cobblestones, surrendering the royal fleet without further struggle. Royal knights lowered their weapons in silence. Silas dropped to his knees before Theron, bowing his head flat against the stone floor. Alira and Ovram stepped onto the stone plaza. Morva and Varkin stood guard behind Theron. Corin squirmed in the dirt, weeping as he watched the royal knights lay down their arms. Krellis leaned from the watchtower window, filling a fresh scroll with the terms of the surrender. Squill bounced onto the shoulder of Theron. Theron ordered 2 mithril golems to step forward and escort the bound prince toward the cellars. The silver golems lifted Corin from the stone floor, dragging him away alongside the guards. Drake walked forward under guard, unrolling a formal parchment treaty of peace before Theron. Theron extended a hand to Silas, gesturing for his brother to rise from the paving stones. Silas took the offered hand and stood up, bowing his head before Theron and Alira in respect. The setting sun cast long golden shadows across the stone plaza and the 30 royal warships. Monster families and human settlers gathered on the plaza, cheering beside the world tree under the evening sky. Standing beside Alira under the glowing canopy, Theron raised his mithril ice axe toward the open sea. The 30 royal warships rested quietly in the harbor as sailors unfurled the golden banners of Cauldrift. Silas and Drake stood shoulder to shoulder among the silent crowd, watching Theron stand beside Alira on the stone plaza as the sun sank beneath the ocean horizon. 2 sleek merchant warships flying the golden crest of Arenthis glided into Cauldrift Harbor. Aveline stood at the prow of the flagship, waving to the crowd on the stone pier. Lucian steered the vessel smoothly beside the breakwater. Theron and Alira walked down to the docks to greet the returning expedition force. Sailors secured the mooring ropes around the iron cleats. Aveline stepped onto the wooden landing ramp, holding a silver leather document tube. Lucian gestured to the lower decks, guiding hundreds of human exiles onto the sunny plaza. The human exiles looked around in awe at the world tree and the bustling monster families. Aveline unsealed the silver container, pulling out a heavy parchment scroll tied with gold thread. Theron accepted the parchment, unrolling the official diplomatic treaty before the council. The document bore the official seal of the Senate of Arenthis, recognizing Cauldrift as an independent, sovereign trading state across the open ocean. Aveline explained that the Republic of Arenthis had established full commercial trade relations with the Cauldrift Empire. Lucian displayed crates of rare seeds, academic textbooks, and merchant contracts unloaded from the hold of the flagship. Ovram and Krellis inspected the treaty documents, nodding in approval at the favorable terms offered by the Foreign Senate. Tobin stepped forward from the crowd, smiling as he recognized the merchant banners from his homeland. The human exiles bowed before Theron, pledging their skills as craftsmen and scholars to the settlement. Alira handed wooden cups of warm, world tree tea to the newcomers. Theron welcomed the new citizens into the community, gesturing toward the residential plaza. A deep horn echoed across the harbor waters, drawing the attention of the crowd to the open sea. 3 massive black-sailed warships bearing the yellow dragon banner anchored outside the bay. Tobin gasped in panic, recognizing the flagship of the Imperial Navy of the Dravith Dragon Kingdom. Varkin drew 2 steel axes, signaling the Goblin Guards to form a line. A heavily armored rowing skiff detached from the Dragonkin flagship, pulling toward the dock. Vorgath stepped onto the pier alongside a tall, winged Dragonkin envoy carrying a golden scroll. Theron stood calmly on the stone plaza, waiting for the foreign delegation to approach. Ignis unrolled the golden parchment, reading the imperial demands of the Dragon King in a booming voice across the plaza. The decree demanded that Kaldrift pay an annual tribute of raw gold, mithril ore, and mana crystals to the Dragon Kingdom. Ignis declared that the island must submit as a vassal territory under the absolute supreme authority of the Dragon King. Silas watched from the watchtower window, marveling at the insane arrogance of the foreign diplomats. Varkin growled in fury, but Theron raised a hand to keep the guards silent on the plaza. Theron stepped forward and took the golden scroll, examining the Imperial Dragon Seal in silence. Raising his right hand, Theron activated his spatial inventory skill to swallow the scroll whole. Ignis gasped in shock as the Imperial decree vanished into thin air before his eyes. Theron informed Ignis that Kaldrift was a free sovereign nation that would never pay tribute to foreign tyrants. Illyra and Ovrum stepped beside Theron, radiating immense magical power across the stone pier. Morva and the mithril golems stepped into formation behind Theron, their silver armor gleaming in the evening sun. Ignis stumbled backward in terror, realizing the island defenders possessed terrifying magic. Theron offered peaceful trade to the Dragon Kingdom on equal terms, rejecting any form of vassalage. Ignis turned around and scrambled back into his skiff, shouting that the Dragon King would answer. The Dragonkin rowing skiff pulled back toward the black warships in frantic haste. Tobin looked at Theron in deep admiration, amazed by his unwavering courage before the Empire. Aveline stood beside Theron, noting that Kaldrift had officially entered the global political stage. Krelis recorded the diplomatic exchange on her scroll, noting the formal establishment of sovereignty across the realm. Merchant vessels from neighboring realms began gathering outside the harbor, eager to initiate trade. The setting sun cast golden light across the world tree and the busy harbor district below. Theron stood beside Illyra and Aveline, watching the calm ocean waters under the evening sky. Monster families and human exiles worked shoulder to shoulder along the stone breakwaters in peace. The golden banners of Kaldrift fluttered above the watchtower, visible to every passing ship at sea. Standing stoically on the high stone pier, Theron looked out toward the open horizon as foreign emissaries and merchant vessels gathered across the harbor bay. The onlookers on the dock stood shoulder to shoulder with Theron under the evening sun, establishing Kaldrift as an invincible sovereign state that all foreign nations must respect. Theron led Squill and Valeria into the control vault. Grimble rode beside Golem 15, hauling Riken liquid metal. The ancient Imperial control core hummed softly in the dark chamber, its crystal conduits pulsing with faint light. Squill hopped onto the central console, extending a blue slime tendril to interface with the main terminal. Valeria manifested her glowing spirit form beside the control altar, placing her palm against the central crystal core. Golden Riken liquid metal poured from the vats, flowing like liquid fire along the stone floor channels. Grimble operated the heavy iron valves, directing the shimmering alloy into the master mechanical conduit pipes. The ancient machinery roared to life as thousands of glass vats illuminated the subterranean metropolis. Golem 15 stepped forward to align the primary power conduits, connecting the Riken reservoir to the island grid. Hundreds of dormant mithril golems stood up in strict formation across the underground plaza, their eyes glowing blue. The crystal terminal projected a massive golden hologram of the entire island domain above the control altar. Valeria raised her hands, unlocking the ancient Imperial defense network created by her fallen civilization. Golden Riken alloy surged through subterranean pipes, bonding with stone foundations. A thunderous tremor echoed across the island as the ancient engine lifted the massive landmass higher above the roaring ocean waves. Theron watched in awe as massive stone seawalls emerged from the ocean floor to fortify the outer harbor. Surface breakwaters expanded outwards, creating 3 reinforced naval harbors lined with heavy mithril battlements. Illyra and Ovrum stood on the watchtower cliff, watching new stone terraces rise up. Varkin guided the Goblin Guards onto the new battlements as automated stone towers materialized along the perimeter. The glowing Riken alloy coated the outer stone walls, granting the entire fortress absolute magic defense against incoming enemy attacks across the sea. Morva and the silver golems marched on the ramparts with shields. Squill channeled the central terminal, activating automated mineral harvesters deep within the lowest mine shafts. Streams of raw gold, mithril ore, and mana crystals flowed directly into the automated warehouse vaults beneath the plaza. Grimble flexed his golden muscles, hammering new mithril gears into the engine core. Golden energy pulses rippled through the roots of the world tree, expanding its luminous canopy across the sky. Theron stood by Valeria, watching the island. The ancient Imperial control core stabilized, shielding Caldrift behind a golden barrier. Automated Riken golems rose from harbor waters, forming a defense line. Krellis observed the mechanical readings on her scroll, recording the vast expansion of the Imperial territory. The subterranean city lightened with warm solar radiation, illuminating lush underground gardens and marble halls. Cryogenic fluid drained from hundreds of glass pods as ancient human citizens began awakening in safety. Valeria wept tears of joy watching her people on the plaza. Squill guided restored citizens toward hot springs. Theron welcomed the ancient empire into Caldrift, offering them sanctuary alongside the monster families. Illyra walked into the subterranean hall with trays of World Tree tea. Ovrum greeted the ancient scholars, eager to exchange magic knowledge beneath the glowing crystal ceiling. Grimble gave golden tools to dwarf slimes, restoring smithing. Golem 15 stood guard at the main archway, welcoming human exiles inside. The surface settlement expanded into a metropolis of white marble. Merchant vessels from distant realms gathered outside the golden breakwaters, marveling at the floating fortress. Aveline stood beside Lucian on the high balcony, looking down at the thriving harbor. Varkin and Rogan raised their weapons together, saluting the automated golems patrolling the high walls. Little Vessa ran across the marble plaza alongside Kess, laughing under the golden sky. Morva patted the shoulder of a newly awakened citizen, reassuring the fearful human. The golden Riken barrier pulsed softly over the island, visible across the sea. Theron stepped onto the high watchtower platform alongside Illyra, looking out at the vast blue horizon. Valeria and Squill stood by the world tree, watching monsters and humans together. The setting sun cast golden light across marble towers and the sea. Standing united beneath the world tree canopy, the citizens of Caldrift celebrated their invincible new home. Theron raised his mithril ice axe toward the sky as the entire island kingdom radiated boundless power across the open ocean to distant realms. The onlookers stood shoulder to shoulder under the evening sun, watching Caldrift rise as an eternal empire across the sea for all generations. Caldis stepped onto the white marble plaza of Caldrift, flanked by Vane. Ondric and the royal ministers walked behind Caldis in silent shock. Theron stood quietly before Caldis under the glowing canopy of the world tree. Vane pointed his golden staff at Theron, demanding immediate submission to the throne. Theron reached into his spatial inventory, pulling out the parchment scroll of his original royal exile. Caldis watched in absolute silence as Theron held the ancient exile decree in his right hand. Raising his palm, Theron channeled his Cave King aura to disintegrate the parchment into golden dust. The ashes of the exile decree drifted across the marble floor, undoing the banishment forever before the court. Vane gasped in outrage, raising his staff to curse the rebellious prince. Ovrum stepped beside Theron, radiating archdemon magic that instantly shattered the staff of Vane. Vane stumbled backward onto the cobblestones in total terror. Ondric stared at the massive mithril golems and dragonkin guards lining the high battlements. Aveline stepped forward from the crowd, carrying the ancient imperial crystal crown on a velvet cushion. Aveline placed the glowing imperial crown upon the head of Theron before the assembled nobles. Theron raised his mithril ice axe, declaring Caldrift an independent sovereign empire across the open ocean. Silas dropped to both knees before Theron, pressing his forehead against the white marble floor. Ondrak and the royal ministers dropped to their knees in complete submission before Emperor Theron. Vane refused to bow, glaring at Theron with bitter hatred from the edge of the plaza. Caldis remained standing before Theron, staring stoically at his son without bowing a single inch. Theron looked into the eyes of Caldis, offering peaceful diplomatic relations as an equal monarch. Illyra and Ovrum stood shoulder to shoulder with Theron, radiating immense magic power across the courtyard. Varkin and the goblin guard stood in strict military formation behind Theron, holding their steel axes. Caldis nodded slowly to Theron, acknowledging the undeniable sovereignty of the Caldrift Empire. Vane turned and fled toward the warship. Caldis turned and walked to his flagship, leaving his court kneeling on the plaza. Silas remained bowed beside Andrik, swearing allegiance to Theron and the World Tree. Aveline stood beside Theron, smiling as the human exiles and monster families cheered across the bay. Lucian and Tobin raised the imperial banners of Caldrift above the high watchtower. The setting sun cast brilliant golden light across the white marble towers and the surrounding ocean. Monster children and human settlers gathered around the World Tree to celebrate the historic coronation. Morva and Golem 15 stood post at the harbor gates, guarding the entrance to the Imperial Plaza. Squill bounced onto the shoulder of Theron, nuzzling against the glowing crystal crown. Alira offered a wooden cup of warm World Tree tea to Theron gently. Theron took the cup and drank, looking out at the vast ocean horizon in deep peace. Andrik and the royal ministers stood up slowly, bowing deeply to Theron before departing. The royal warships unfurled their sails, gliding out of Caldrift Harbor under the watchful eyes of the golems. Krellis recorded the entire diplomatic coronation on her parchment scroll for the Imperial Archives. Ovram and Alira walked beside Theron, discussing future trade routes with foreign realms. Little Vessa tugged at Aveline's sleeve, asking when the foreign trading ships would come back. Grimble flexed his golden Riken muscles, hammering a decorative archway for the new palace entrance. Valeria manifested her spirit form beside Squill, smiling at the restored harmony of the Empire. The golden Riken barrier pulsed softly above the island, visible to every ship across the open ocean. Theron stood beside Alira and Aveline on the high watchtower platform, watching the sea. Monster families and human settlers stood united on the stone plazas, cheering for Emperor Theron. The golden banners of Caldrift fluttered in the ocean breeze, marking the rise of a new global power. Silas took up his post at the harbor gate beside Morva, wearing the gray sash of a Caldrift officer. Aveline unrolled a trade charter across the stone table, marking the first shipping lanes between Arenthus and Caldrift. Theron pressed the imperial seal into the warm wax, signing his first treaty as an equal to the mainland crowns. Krellis carried the sealed charter down to the archive vault, opening the first chronicle of the Caldrift Empire. Theron watched the last royal sail vanish past the horizon, knowing the next ships to arrive would come to trade. Months passed as morning sunlight illuminated the stone plazas. Vessa walked down the marble steps in her human form, now a tall maiden carrying a mithril axe. Kess flew overhead on white wings, her silver hair gleaming. Fenwick soared above the harbor as a red dragon letting out fire. Goblin workers and human craftsmen worked along the breakwaters. Kobold archers and orc sailors shared roasted fish and fresh World Tree tea on the sunny pier. Varkan and Rogan sat together at a wooden table, laughing while arm wrestling before the crowd. Shaman Ovram taught young goblin and human children magic theory inside the high library tower. Lucian steered a sleek merchant vessel into the harbor, waving to the cheering onlookers along the stone docks. Aveline and Alira walked through the bustling outdoor market, inspecting crates of foreign fruits and spices. Grimble flexed his golden Riken muscles at the forge, hammering out shimmering mithril plows for the farmers. Sithra guided her spiderlings across the upper terraces, harvesting soft spider silk for the weavers. Squill bounced merrily beside a group of newly awakened human citizens, guiding them toward the hot springs. Morva and the silver golems patrolled the stone perimeter walls in silent, watchful formation. Krellis sat near the watchtower window, writing detailed records of the Empire's daily commerce. Tobin unloaded bales of cotton and rare seeds from the merchant flagship onto the wooden docks. Children from every tribe raced through the central courtyard, playing tag under the glowing World Tree canopy. Steam engines chugged along the iron rails, carrying raw ore from the deep subterranean mines. Automated harvesters collected gold, mithril, and mana crystals from the lower mine shafts in steady rhythm. The golden Riken barrier pulsed softly above the island, protecting the peaceful settlement from harm. Alira carried a tray of fresh World Tree tea toward the quiet cliffside path above the harbor. Vessa and Kess walked beside Alira, talking about their daily patrol along the outer perimeter. Fenwick landed softly near the World Tree, folding his massive red wings to rest in the shade. Theron stepped away from the plaza, walking toward the coastline. Theron entered the small ocean cave where his exile had begun. The old stone walls of the cavern remained untouched, holding the quiet memories of his first days. Theron picked up the old ice axe from his first day. Looking down at the simple tool, Theron smiled softly as he remembered the Crest guidance system. Squill hopped into the cave, bouncing onto the shoulder of Theron with a familiar soft squish. Alira stepped into the dim shadows of the cave. Vessa and Kess peered into the small cave, smiling at Theron. Theron accepted the cup of tea from Alira, taking a quiet sip as the cool sea breeze swept inside. Looking out through the narrow cave opening, Theron watched his thriving island kingdom in peace. The white marble towers of the capital rose high into the blue sky beside the glowing world tree. Ships from distant foreign realms rested peacefully in the harbor. Monster families and human settlers worked together along the breakwaters under the warm, golden afternoon sun. The Cave King crest on Theron's hand radiated a soft, steady blue light in the quiet cavern shadows. Theron set the old ice axe against the stone wall, stepping toward the cave entrance beside Alira. Vesa and Kess walked on either side of Theron toward the courtyard. Squill rested happily on the warm shoulder of Theron. Varkin and Rogan raised their wooden cups in a cheerful toast as Theron approached the crowd. Shaman Overim and Aveline bowed respectfully, smiling as the citizens gathered around the world tree. Lucian and Tobin unfurled a massive golden banner of the Cauldrift Empire above the high watchtower. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold across the vast ocean horizon. Fenwick let out a joyful flame into the evening sky, illuminating the white marble towers and the harbor bay. Theron stopped at the top of the plaza steps, and the noise of the crowd dropped away as they saw him. Goblin and human children ran between the long tables with paper lanterns, weaving through the gathered crowd. Sithra lowered a rope of silk from the watchtower so the smallest of them could climb up and see the banner. Krellis struck the harbor bell once, and the whole plaza turned toward the world tree in sudden quiet. Theron stood beside Alira and his growing family under the world tree, watching the ocean horizon as the sun set over the empire.